2008, the number of biometric patent was for the consulting firm I was working for. We just said at that time that it's not that biometric was dead. It was biometric technology was ready for massive disruption. And since 2010, we were pushing a lot with biometric. And during this session, you will see how, from a pure concept, a biometric concept, to the technology itself, you will see many players from the industry, how they are leveraging biometric to provide end-user consumer top high-end products. I hope at the end of this session you will have a better vision of the biometric market and the way the global ecosystem within the biometric ecosystem is evolving. Let me introduce for a presentation, 15-minute presentation, Mr. Alexandre Amar from PricewaterhouseCoopers. He is Senior Manager of Management Consulting, and he will discuss the trends and perspective of biometric market. Alexandre?
All good? 1, 2, 1, 2. Everyone hears me? Very good. It's a full room, but I don't see anyone because I'm just blinded. So just excuse me if you have a question. I probably won't see it, but we have 5 minutes at the end. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everyone, and congrats for your first good choice of the afternoon, that is to join the Biometrics stream. I think we're going to have some good fun this afternoon, and I'm very happy to be here to present you a little bit more about biometrics. So, at PwC, we're really passionate about identity overall. We've been working with biometrics for the past 4 or 5 years, assisting governments, major private economic operators, and supporting them within, the transformation that is occurring at the moment. So I have only 15 minutes for you, so I won't cover, of course, everything that you might want to hear, but I'm very happy to take some questions, and if you want to, come and see me later on, I'm very happy also to discuss later. So 2018 year in biometrics, trends and perspective. Let's go. So what's our point of view on biometrics? First, biometrics, they are becoming ubiquitous. You might just not see it yet. So what does that mean? Ubiquitous means everywhere. When I say everywhere, literally everywhere. As soon as you're going to need to identify yourself, whatever the reason, biometrics are going to be there. We see that already today, but there's so many things that are occurring at the moment, and I'm going to cover a couple of them, that really we believe it's going to be there everywhere in the future. It's going to become the new normal. Second one is biometrics are not without risk. I mean, I had to talk about that. Of course, it's a TRUSTECH conference, so just a little bit about risks and how to position yourself compared to these. And then the last one is biometrics coming soon to a theater near you. So how can you leverage on the power of biometrics and all what's happening today in the world to make it happen for your company and for your customers, for your users, for your employees, everyone. So biometrics are becoming ubiquitous. You might just not see it yet. So today, really everyone is expecting biometrics. It's a funny thing, because I'm using this right now to read a couple of my notes, how happy I am to use biometrics and not to have to type my 10-thing code. But when this thing came out, everyone was like, okay, fingerprints, this is something for the FBI. It's when you're a criminal that you're doing fingerprints, right? And then this thing came out, and then everyone was like, okay, just quick show of hands. How many people thought I'm never going to use these fingerprints things? For sure I did. I said, I'm not going to use that. How many of those who raised their hands, and I'm sorry, I can't see you, but how many still don't use it? I don't see any hands raised. Oh, one, okay, thank you. So we have 1 out of maybe 150 people not using it today. I think this is really the key, is that personally I lasted 1 or 2 weeks. Just to let you know. So today everyone is expecting biometrics. Even the major, the most popular, the most famous companies in the world consumer brands in the world, they're now going the extra mile to not only make it the best, but also advertise it. This is part really of the DNA. This is yours, and I'm going to make sure that it's going to be so convenient to use while being secure. And this is the entire key. Everyone now is expecting biometrics. And the thing is, just imagine tomorrow if Apple comes with, you know, a product that doesn't have biometrics. You have to start typing your password again. What's going to be your reaction? It's like, no way, deal breaker. No phone nowadays, you would expect, you know, not to have those. And this is also going to be the same in the future. Why can't I also pay with my biometrics? Why can't I just, you know, go out of the shop, Amazon Go style? This is going to be the new normal in 5 to 10 years. This is going to become a deal breaker. If you don't have it, if you're asking people to come, you know, take your card out or your PIN code, this is not going to work. You probably all know this triangle, right? So it's always more or less a question of looking at security, efficiency, convenience. You can't have the three of them. What you can do is go more or less towards one or the other. And the thing is, for a very long time, this has been a pretty big triangle. So security is like, you know, Trump style, sorry, didn't mean to get politic, but you know, you build a wall, no one goes through, but then, oh, guess what, you don't have any customers. Convenience and efficiency, of course, this is a key thing, but when you look at it from the perspective of, you know, the CSO and so on and so forth, it's really about the CISO, it's really about security. What biometrics managed to do is not to remove the triangle, but it dramatically shrunk the triangle. So you can really have much better security while keeping your efficiency and your convenience. And you can still select where you want to go. But this is really what it's brought. Another thing is, for the past couple of years, and remember this is about the trends and perspectives, for a couple of years it was all about security. I want to implement biometrics because, you know, okay, the FBI does it, it looks really cool, at NASA they have it, okay, so I want to improve the security. Now actually, it's much more a question of efficiency and convenience. So by 2020, and that's almost next year, in terms of the trend, and we really see that happening, customer experience will overtake price and product as the key brand differentiator. And that's really a big deal. Right now, wherever you go, what you're being sold is experiences. It's not products anymore. It's really all about the experience. And this part, you know, that biometrics enable there is really key to make it happen. And a couple of years ago, even, you know, I mean, our practice is 5 years old, but still, it was really the security guys who were coming to see us and say, well, how should we implement biometrics because we want to make it more secure? Now it's actually the strategy officers, even the CEOs of major firms in the world who come and who say, we know that we're going to lose touch with our customers if we don't go that way, and we know that this is also a solution that's still going to please my CISO. I had to do that one. I was requested to do it, but I'm happy to do it. So which modalities were in 2018? Sorry for those who know that by heart, but face is becoming really, really, really a big deal for several reasons. The first one, of course, is the most convenient. I mean, most people have a face, so it's not like, you know, fingerprints where some people have lost them for sad reasons, but face, everyone has it. Plus it's so easily available. Every phone now has this. You have it on your passport. It's very easy to recognize. So if the system doesn't work, myself, I can go and say, okay, yeah, this is this person, no problem. Try to do that with a fingerprint or with an iris, good luck. Not to say that they're bad, but face, really, when you think about efficiency and convenience, is really the key thing right now. Iris is also very good. Oh, sorry, just to come back to face. Artificial intelligence is really also improved dramatically the performance of face. We used to say face is unreliable, it's not secure. It's not anymore the case. It's still problematic when you're going to go with a very big database. If you want to compare one person out of 1 million, you will still have trouble with the face, but for many applications, face is now really, really good. Iris is extremely, extremely strong. It's now good because you can do it also at a distance. It's very secure, difficult to spoof, a lot of good things happening. Fingerprints is a little bit on the downside, but you know, Jean-Noël was talking about the patents lately. Now with the contactless fingerprints, it's also starting to pick up a little bit again. Voice recognition is gaining traction in a few markets. Russia, China is getting quite big. Europe, we don't have it that much, but it's probably going to come because it enables things that you can't do otherwise. For example, everything related to phone, it's very good. It's also a very good complementary biometrics. There's a couple of others I just wanted to mention. Everything related to vein is borderline impossible to spoof. Tricking the system to believing that it's something genuine. So this is also getting traction. Of course, the problem is you can derive a lot of health related information from that, and also it's not very convenient because you really need to push your hand. I know some vendors are trying to improve that, and I believe it's going to happen. But in 2018, even 2019, it's probably not going to become mainstream. ECG, I love ECG myself because maybe some of you have seen this NIME band thing. Well, they've been around for 5 years, still haven't gained traction, but it's basically saying you have a bracelet and it's constantly monitoring your heart rate, your heart signature, as they call it. And what it enables is constant authentication. So it's very good for like employee or security factory environments. It's really good. 3D face is also gaining a little bit of traction. More difficult to do than face, and it's really a question of what you accept in terms of the trade-off. But yeah, just in a nutshell, I would really say expect face to really become the primary biometrics, and then for specific use cases, iris fingerprints, and then complement it potentially by some others. Another reason why biometrics are getting really, everywhere and really ubiquitous is because now we can merge it with other technologies that we didn't have available a couple of years ago. Primarily artificial intelligence. So when you look at, the image on the left here, you can not only know who is who, but also what is the intent, what is going to happen in a couple of seconds, so you can make a lot of predictive analysis. So this is very important in security environment. So you see just here, for example, the lady has been, seen next to a hot saw. Okay, maybe you can give an alert, or you can, track really the security. So that's very important. But you can also do a lot of things. So that's a baseball game for those who can't really see it. But you can really know who is where, and then improve the performance of your people after that. It can be about performance, but it can also really be about security, and it can enable things like the Amazon Go type of shopping experience, which is really great. All right, let's talk about risk. So they are not without risk, this is clear, but the point is neither are other authentication methods. And the first point that I want to make, well, actually I made some couple of questions. These are the things that we sometimes hear, is like biometrics are too unreliable. And there's a good point to that, because it's true that biometrics accuracy can never reach 100%. It's just not possible, right? So that's out of the way. Iris can get quite close to 100%, but even DNA cannot get to 100%. So the thing is, you don't necessarily need to rely only on biometrics. And this is a common misconception. It's like, when you send OTPs or things like this, people assume that you have another method, OTP, one-time password, SMS or token and so on and so forth, assume that you already have logged into an account. So you have actually a double authentication. And biometrics is really great because it's so easy to use, and it can complement your primary way of authenticating. So by now you must all be sick about PSD2, but the concept of strong authentication there requires at least 2 modalities, and biometrics can be one. So when you think about everything that you're doing on your phone, I want to say thanks God for biometrics, because now we can really use it without all these pesky SMSs and so on and so forth. So you can really enable it in an ecosystem with PIN code, account logged in, location, a token, a key even, and others. So biometrics doesn't need to get to 100%. As long as it's good enough to complement the first modality, then it's good. The second one that I hear often is biometrics are so easily foolable. I hope that you can read this little comic. It makes me laugh every time. But I think it's really important to say that yes, you absolutely need to assess the vulnerability of biometrics, your implementation of biometrics before you deploy it. but still it's not going to become a major attack vector. It's too expensive, it's really too time consuming, and honestly, I mean, remove your mask, you really look stupid with your, you know, it's like, it just doesn't work. You see it because it's very public, like as soon as there is something, everyone is very proud that they hacked the iPhone. The fact of the matter is it's very expensive, very difficult to do, and so much easier to do it in another way. So for those who can't read, is there anyone who can't read at the back? Should I read it too? Yes, okay, I will. So there are two guys talking, and it's called A Crypto Nerd's Imagination. So the guy is saying, oh, his laptop's encrypted, let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. And then the other guy say, oh, no good, it's 4096-bit RSA, so it's like very, very strong encryption. And then say, blast, our evil plan is foiled. So the first thing is always, you know, oh, we're going to build, you know, this very sophisticated system in order to crack it. And then the one on the right is what would actually happen is, oh, his laptop's encrypted. Drug him and hit him with this $5 wrench until he gives us the password. I find it funny, but at the same time, you all received this email from the son of the Nigerian king who is asking you for, you know, kindly borrowing your bank account. This works today so much easier than going through that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't assess it. I'm just saying don't freak out because, you know, it's spoofable. Today's main headache, though, I want to temper this, is morphing attacks. This is something whereby you take two pictures, you morph them together, and then you insert it into the system that you want to attack, and then the system would recognize potentially both people. So this is a big headache for governments, especially when you look at passports and visas. Why? Because you are in control of the picture that you give. You know, take your little scissors, you cut the picture, and then you give it to them. So when you're having a system with face, it's very important to control the enrollment process. So enrollment is the time that you take the biometrics and you decide, okay, this is the one I'm going to trust for the rest of the life cycle. Okay, so morphing attacks, this is still giving a headache, but it's still not a deal breaker. All right. Another question we get is, what happens if my biometric database gets hacked? I'll read this one out. I guess everyone has seen this comic before, but it's basically that guy who's taking a, how do you call this, by the way? Someone help me, please. Like a saw, let's say, and is like changing his fingerprints, like ruining his fingerprints. And then the wife is saying, what on earth do you think you're doing? The guy is saying, I'm changing my iPhone password. You know, like, well, it's a funny thing, but essentially, before we even get to that, the rule number one is always separate the key information. I mean, you might get my biometrics, but if you don't know what to do with it, I mean, what's the point? You know, there's really not much. The second part, and this is why this comic is actually quite wrong, is for those who are not very familiar about how biometrics works, it's a process that more or less always goes exactly like this. So this is with fingerprints, but it works with every other kind of biometrics. So you first start with presenting the biometrics, so you put your finger on the sensor, then there will be some image acquiring and image processing going on. Then you will extract the features, so you will identify what is interesting for my algorithm, and then what you're going to do is a template creation. So this template is a mathematical representation of these little dots that you can see here that the algorithm has deemed, you know, interesting to capture. And then it will make something that only contains that. It's encrypted, it's proprietary by the algorithm, and you cannot go back from the template to the feature, neither from the feature to the image processing. So basically what you want to do is, if someone hacks your database, if you decided to go for a central database, well, you change your algorithm, all of this is worthless. If you were smart enough, you didn't keep all of that so that no one can actually get back. So what you have is, let's say, it's like someone stole a key, but you change all the locks, so there's no point. And anyways, you can't even see the key. So it's really, you cannot get back from that to that. So once if someone steals all of that, if you notice that, you change the algorithm, you're good to go. Okay. There's also something that's you know, kind of always somehow I find funny. It's like people are sometimes getting crazy about even giving information to the government, but they're not afraid to put it on Facebook. So here is a little bit the case as well. It's no point to freak out about biometrics that are commonly available. I mean, just before I took a picture of this room, I have all your face biometrics. I can delete them if you want me to, because of GDPR and stuff. But overall, our information is almost everywhere, especially when we think about facial image. So the biometrics itself is not that valuable, to be honest. It's really the information that you associate it with. Still not reassured? Well, then maybe you can consider alternative storage methods. Because storing all your biometrics inside a big database is not always the smartest thing to do. You can have self-sovereign. That means I own my identity data. You can have also existing services. So for example, when I log into my bank from the iPhone, it's basically the iPhone saying, yes, this is this guy, and it's linked to this identity. So my bank doesn't have my fingerprints. Even Apple has trouble reaching it. So you can really leverage on things like FIDO, for example, Apple ID, and so on and so forth. And then the last point is local storage. I think actually just like two sessions after me, we'll be talking about biometrics on cards. So badges, cards, this is also another way that you can put it, because if someone loses her card, then all the rest of the data is still safe. So you have also other ways to protect this information. All right, so here I normally had a little point about the legal aspects, but I know that Olga just after me will talk about it extensively, so I removed that part. And rather, I want to focus on what's going to happen very soon, and what I encourage you to do in the future. The first thing is that worldwide federated applications are building up. What does that mean? That means that you won't have to build your own program from the ground up in order to be able to leverage on digital identity and biometrics. What we see, and we work on all of these sectors, is on the transport side of things. There's a lot of good use cases coming with optimization of operation and security with instant biometric identification, and also everything that you would use beyond passport control. That's a concept of curb to gate. You might have seen some vendors here today who really propose this thing. That means you don't have to take out your passport anymore, your ticket receipt, luggage receipt, your boarding card, and so on and so forth. You all use your biometrics, and this is very convenient. This is very good, and this is going to come to the industry, I can tell you, in the next couple of years. Retail is very good, so you have the security and efficiency aspects, but also everything related to personalization, because overall loyalty schemes have always kind of failed to attract people. Not only is it very costly, but for people it's like, oh, it's another card, so you really need to incentivize them by significant discounts and so on and so forth, that people take your whatever loyalty program. With biometrics, you actually provide with a real service. You say, okay, if you want to be part of this biometric scheme, of course we need to know a little bit about you. So we're going to enable you this, for example, Amazon Go experience. That means you come in, we know that you purchased, I don't know, an iPhone, so probably you want a Thunderbolt cable. We're going to propose that to you, and then you just walk out. That's great service. That's convenient. So I'm ready to give my info to these guys, and that way you keep the relationship with the customer. Financial services, of course, biometric know your customer. This is very important. Transaction speed, reducing processing cost, automation of operations. So there's nothing more annoying and boring than waiting in the queue at your local branch. So this is why now we have applications coming everywhere. We even have pure fintech players such as Revolut and the kind of companies like that. And they really are going to leverage more and more on biometrics, because you can do all this entire KYC at a distance. So you cut costs dramatically, and you can give the money back to your customers somehow and your shareholders. And then healthcare. This is also a very big thing. I don't know if anyone's in this, but I very much believe in that for two reasons. The first one is, who has access to my health data? I very much care about that as a citizen, but also, how do I make sure then the day, I don't know, I faint or something like that, I'm not being administered medicine that would potentially kill me because I'm allergic to something. And there's a lot of mistakes that are happening in the hospitals because they have just so many people to take care of that to be really sure who you're administering the drugs is really key. So why am I talking about these? Because all of these have a common point, which is you don't need to do it company by company. I mean, healthcare could be at the level of, well, we're in Cannes, let's say at the level of France. It could even potentially be at the level of Europe. For example, I'm coming from Luxembourg, travel to Germany, to Belgium. I could faint anywhere. So why just, stop at the hospital of Cannes? No, you really need to go and grow bigger. And this is what's happening at the moment. A lot of people are realizing that, it's only by converging this digital identity into something meaningful, for example, healthcare, so you stay within the healthcare system, that you're really going to build something great. All right, last slide. Train is leaving the station, time to get on board. Biometrics, it's just exploding. I wish it wasn't. My phone would ring a little bit less, but this is really how it is. And the application is staggering. Every day you have a new use case, a new method to use it. Many startups are leveraging on it to disrupt markets, especially on the payment and retail ecosystem. There are alliances that are forming to federate the identity at the industry, national or international level. For example, Verimi in Germany. Look it up if you don't know about them. This is, I think, something that's really going to impact the industry. And Bank ID, for example, in the Nordics. They don't use biometrics yet, but I can tell you it's on their roadmap, and it has to be. It really has to be. In 2019, I believe, will be the year of consolidation. There's a couple of projects I can't talk to you about, but I can tell you, for example, in the transport industry, there are some absolutely major things that are going to occur. And we're not talking about one airline or one airport, we're talking global. And this is really going to come. So our recommendation for 2019 is to identify and join a digital biometric ID endeavor in your industry. Join forces with your competitors if needed. And this is important because digital identity is really one of the things where you're actually not competing with your existing competitors. You're competing with the potential disruptors that are going to come. They're going to take ownership, they're going to take the relationship with your customers, and then you're going to be in trouble. So we see actually a lot of competing firms working together to establish this, and this is very good to see. And most of these endeavors, they're still nascent and still looking for strong participants. So this is why I really encourage you to if you're interested in the topic, really look in terms of the industry who you could partner with to make that happen for you. Because after that, once the standards will be done, for example, I don't know, healthcare or retail, for example, once a couple of big players are going to say, okay, this is now the standards, then it's going to become pay to play. You won't have a say in this game, and all you will be able to do is either do it on your own or pay them to be able to use this system. So this is really a strong recommendation for 2019. And with that, I think my presentation is over, but I'm very happy to take questions now or later. I don't know if I still have time, actually.
Thank you, Alexander. Do you have a question for him? I'm quite sure, yes. No. Yes? I may have one. Sorry, Alexander.
Sure.
Where do you feel the revenue will come from?
So you mean from the perspective of biometric vendor?
Hardware, software, platform, storage.
Yeah. So historically, it's been all about the hardware. Let's put it that way. And like many other industries, it's now transitioning much more to the software. So it's really about making it happen as a service, because we know, for example, a lot of clients, they don't want to have to deal with that. They say, okay, give that to me as a service. So it doesn't matter actually if you have 5, 10, 20, 50 biometric equipment. What's really going to matter is the service that's behind. How do you ensure the trust? How do you make sure that everything is GDPR compliant? So the data collection, acquisition, and so on and so forth. So it's really more, let's say, the back end. What's to use one of the industry's words, what is orchestrating all of this data and the trust, this is really going to be important, and that's also what you're going to be charged for if you go directly for a vendor like that.
Maybe a quick last one question. One question there.
Can you see me?
Yes, now yes.
It's me. Thank you for the presentation. I was a bit shocked about your presentation.
Okay.
I have to admit. A bit naive, I would say, on some points.
It was,
In
of course, a very short presentation, but we can
I
discuss.
understand, yeah. In particular, on the security aspects of biometrics. Spoofing attacks, master prints is a recent example. So I would say that we don't know all the technologies that are out tomorrow, but it is for sure that maybe in 5 years from now, once you have building up biometric systems, that it will be compromised. And what will you tell the audience in that case if you would redo this presentation at that time?
I will probably tell the same. I think so. What you were talking about, the master prints, is, for example, what we saw a couple of days ago with artificial intelligence, that you can basically know exactly what the algorithm is looking for, and therefore you can hack any of these systems. And I go back to the point about it being very public and be very, let's say, expensive to do. So, for example, a couple of months ago, there was a major hack. I'm not going to cite the vendor name, but for some RFID, some chips, which was equipping hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of badges and access cards and so on and so forth. This happens in every, let's say, every industry. Whatever the token that you use, there will be at some point, the bandits are going to be better than the police. One chance that we have here with biometrics is so visible, and it's also very clear to people what is the impact, that you have a lot of researchers also fighting against it. So it's not that it's not going to happen, it's just it's going to happen at the same level as the others, but for some reasons also you can much more easier say, okay, now I notice this algorithm is not good, I just switch the algorithm and that's it. It's not like, I have a major flaw that can still exist within the system for the next years.
Yeah, I have a totally different perspective on that.
Yep.
I think there's a big flaw in your reasoning. Simply assuming that it will be compromised in the future. You need to take action now and not simply accept there will be an attack, but think about the design of your system. Do I need to store everything? Do I have other technical means? And not just say, well, we use templates and then we cannot go back. That's simply not true. So I think it's a bit naive what you're explaining here. Sorry.
No, but this is a point of view. I think this is also what I was explaining, that you have a lot of different systems and ways that you can do it, so locally, centrally, so you really need to think about these aspects, of course. And the point about the template stands. You still can't go back. So, but...
Thank you, Alexander.
Yeah.
Maybe you will prefer my question than the question of this person. But
well, no, I think it's good to have this debate, to be honest, because we're here about talking about security, and I'm very happy to actually continue discussing about this question because I think it's very important. And I'm sorry if I didn't go into too much detail, but I'm very happy to do so later on.
And it's a good point because some of the questions this person just asked will be answered later during the conversation, so it's perfect. So when we are talking about biometrics, you all heard about regulation, legal, and you all heard about GDPR, and some of you probably are really scared about GDPR. So I'm really happy to have Madame Olga Kuroshkina. She is privacy lawyer from KNL Gates, and she will explain you. She will do a presentation regarding data protection, data privacy specifically for the biometric market. And she will do a comparison between US and Europe. So I ask you to welcome Madame Kuroshkina.
So, hi everyone, and thank you very much for having me here and for this opportunity to present the privacy angle of the whole biometrics topic. I really hope that my very legal part of the discussion would not bore you too much after the very interesting presentation of Alexander concerning the trends in the biometrics, which is really fascinating. So first of all, I'm a lawyer and I work a lot with personal data protection and privacy, and let me reassure you, I know that when a lawyer starts talking about this stuff, the atmosphere just tends to get really tense because everyone is just waiting for new prohibitions and new restrictions from the GDPR, and it just scares everyone. So I will try to make the most of the 20 minutes I have and tell you why I think the biometric identification is the best and the simplest way to identify a person. What is its legal framework, the rules and some general principles, but without drowning you in a million of definitions and exceptions. And I will finish by underlining some main areas on which you would maybe want to focus if you want to promote or develop biometrics technologies. So, in the words of the French Data Protection Authority, the biometrics data is a personal data like no other. And indeed it is, because it is a personal data because it allows to identify a person, but it is like no other means of identification because it was not assigned by a third party and it was not even chosen by a person himself or herself, because it actually results from the very body of this person, and it designates and represents only this person's body and nothing else in an unalterable way. So biometrics is sure a means of identification like any other, but it is often better and it is often simpler. It is often better because the required reliability rates are much higher for biometrics than for any other identification technology. Just like Alexander said, one of the things we can blame the biometrics for is like, oh no, it's not reliable. But think of it, the percentage that we're talking about and the criteria that we're talking about, we never apply it to any other identification means. We don't apply it to a password or to a manuscript signature. The rates are much higher for biometrics. And sometimes it is simpler because it actually changes the interaction with the machine, the whole interface, human to the machine. Because with biometrics, well, sure, you will have to think about some technical challenges like how to store the biometrics data and how to protect it. But in the end, you just need to have a person and some reading machines that would be able to read his biometric information. And in this way, you would avoid any kind of human error or forgetfulness, because it will be the machine that interacts with the person and not the person that would interact with the machine as in other means of identification. But the biometrics data anyway is based on some intangible biological reality. So any misuse or misappropriation of this data could have very serious and grave consequences for the individual, which explains the fact that it has such a specific legal framework. So the General Data Protection Regulation, the famous GDPR, classifies the biometric data as a special category of data, which means that it has some appropriate safeguards and some additional guarantees in comparison with other types of personal data. But as you can see on the slide, the definition is actually a bit unusual, because the biometric data is defined as personal data resulting from specific technical processing relating to physical, biological, or behavioral characteristic of a person, and which allows a unique identification or confirms the identification of this person. Which means that unlike any other categories of special data under the GDPR, like the ethnic origin or the religious beliefs, the very nature of the biometrics data it's not sufficient to classify it as a special category of data. You need also to look at the purpose of its processing and at the technical process. So, for example, when you post pictures on the Facebook or when someone is just, processing individuals' photos, often this would not fall under the framework of processing of the biometric data, because you don't process it on the purpose to identify the individual, and you don't have this specific technical processing that allows this identification. As for the US, today there are only 3 US states that have specific laws for the biometrics. It's Washington, Texas, and Illinois. The New York biometrics laws is under the review in the Assembly, so it would probably be adopted soon. And these laws are quite similar, and unlike the GDPR, they tend to define the biometric data not by its characteristics and not really by its purpose, but by the examples, like voice print or fingerprint or whatever, eye retina. And this is the difference with the GDPR, but the Illinois is actually brings the definition a bit closer to the GDPR because it distinguishes two different elements. It's a bit subtle. There is a biometric identifier, which is a fingerprint or a voice print, etc. And then there is a biometric information, which is the information that comes from this identifier, but is used to allow the identification of the individual. So this is a bit like in the GDPR, and you can see that the biometric identifier is not necessarily the biometric information. So as to the, so as to the legal framework, under the GDPR within the European Union, the processing of biometric data is actually generally prohibited for the purposes other than investigation and detection of criminal offenses, and this processing is actually not covered by the GDPR at all, but by another European directive. But happily, the GDPR does of course have some exceptions and some derogations from this general prohibition. There are 10 of them, but I only cited some of them that may be more interesting for you, because other than the derogations that are related to the public interest and to some medical purposes, well, the biometric processing is permitted when there is the user, the individual, has given his or her explicit consent. And just a small remark on that, as you all maybe know, under the GDPR, the consent is already quite demanding, it's quite difficult to get. And the explicit consent is actually even more difficult because it cannot be just an affirmative action. It should actually be a clear manifestation of the will, like the person has to make an electronic signature or to sign a document or whatever. Then there are some other exceptions, like the need to safeguard the vital interests of individuals, or the need to use this data in the some social sphere, employment, social security, etc. And the GDPR actually allows the member states to reduce these lists of derogations and to complete these lists of derogations. So under the French law, there is one more exemption actually, which is, well, it's quite well known. It's the control of the access to the workplace by the biometric information. It is allowed under the French law, but only if it's compliant with the regulation issued by the French Data Protection Authority that will be adopted soon, because they're updating it. So then there is another important legal framework element, that there is almost always a mandatory privacy impact assessment or data protection impact assessment that needs to be done when you're processing biometric data. As you maybe know, after the entry into force of the GDPR in France, the logic has changed, because before there was this regime of authorizations where you needed to ask the French Data Protection Authority, hey, can I process this data? And then the authority could authorize you or not authorize you to do it. But now it's an accountability principle, which means that you prepare internally some documents that prove that your processing is legal, that you have good reasons to process this data, that you protect it well, that you protect well all the rights of the individuals, so everything is great. So it's kind of like a story that you tell to the regulator, and then you can process this data, well, if it's truth, of course. So then, under the US state laws, the regime of the biometrics data is a bit similar to the GDPR actually, which is surprising because we have very different personal data cultures. But under the US state laws, generally the processing of biometric data does require prior notice to the individuals, so they have to be informed of it. Then the controller, the company, cannot do anything that they want with the personal data. The disclosure and the commercial use are limited. Under the Texas and Illinois laws, they actually require prior consent of individual, just like under the GDPR. And well, then there are some standard principles like limited retention period and the destruction after the use of the biometric data, but it's not specific to the biometric data, it's just all personal data. So the fact that the biometric data is so timeless and so reliable is actually exactly the factor that causes the most concern, and which leads the French Data Protection Authority to find some kind of an approach to the biometric data in 1988. So yeah, it's been a long time. And that's an approach that has worked till recently. So the French Data Protection Authority has classified biometric data in two different categories. The biometric data with traces and the trace-free biometric data. The biometric data with traces is, for example, a fingerprint or the DNA, something we actually leave a trace behind. This trace can be recovered, it can be reproduced, it could be used afterwards. And then there is a trace-free biometrics, which actually demands the presence of the person to preserve it, because otherwise it's not preservable. And the problem was exactly with the fingerprints and with the DNA. Those are the two things that are still protected a little bit more than all of the other biometric data, because it was portable, because it was reproducible, and that's why the risk for the person was actually higher, because it was so simple to use. And so that's why there is this special regime of protection to the fingerprint, for example. But back then, so we were classifying these biometrics and we were saying, so these demand more protection, these demand less protection. But we also found this proportionality requirement, which is applicable to both of them, to the biometrics with traces and then to the biometrics trace-free, without traces. But it was more, this proportionality requirement was a bit more exigent with fingerprints, for example. And this is a requirement that means that the processing of the biometric data should actually be proportional to the purposes and to the risks that it poses to the individuals. It's a requirement that has never applied to any other identification means, like the password. You can't say, oh no, 20 digits, it's not proportional to the purpose we're pursuing, so we cannot do it. But with biometric data, it was quite important. And for example, if there was some jurisprudence of the French Data Protection Authority, and for example, the fact that there was children's access that was controlled on the entry into the school, and they were verifying if the parents have paid for the children's school meals. So this was judged by the authority as not proportional, because there could have been some other identification means that could have been used instead of this one, that would have been just as good as badges or video surveillance. And because the fingerprints, well, afterwards they can be used by anyone. Like, there could be a public authority, there could be a police that could use these fingerprints afterwards if there is, I don't know, a moped stolen or an attack. And this way the purpose would be misused, and the French Data Protection Authority said that it's too dangerous to the individuals. But then comes the trace-free biometrics. Because just as Alexander was saying, the trend now is the face recognition. And the face recognition is actually trace-free biometrics, because we're not walking around and just leaving traces of our face everywhere, unlike the DNA and fingerprints. But for the face print, there is no need for the person to be actually present, because we can do facial recognition on videos or on photos, etc. So these criteria of the biometrics with traces and with no traces actually became irrelevant, like 2 years ago. So we had to review it. And the French Data Protection Authority has found another criteria in order to differentiate different processing of biometric data that is that depends on the kind of the storage of the biometric data. Is it on the biometric device over which the individual has complete and exclusive control, or is it somewhere in the central database where not only the individual concerned can have the access, but also some other people, authorized or not authorized, and which could pose, of course, a greater risk for the rights and freedoms of the individual. So the exclusive control of the biometric profile is, for example, when you have, I don't know, a card, right, or a badge where you have all the biometric information on it, with which maybe you can pay, maybe you can do something else. But anyway, this information is only registered on this support and nowhere else, and so you have exclusive control of it. And this way of storing the biometric data is more protective of individuals and is much more recommended by all the data protection authorities. And you would have much less problems if that's the way you store it. And the good example is actually, exactly the phone unlocking technology, where you put your fingerprint, or where it's the facial recognition technology in your phone. Well, it's actually only stored in the phone, and in this way, it's only the user that has the control of this information and on whose initiative this information is used to unlock the phone. And the French Data Protection Authority has actually considered that in this case, this use is kind of a domestic use, kind of a family use that doesn't fall under the GDPR. So the GDPR doesn't apply. So that's kind of great for the companies. And so yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I'm talking so much about the GDPR and about how does it works in all of the European countries, and how should we process the biometric data when we are in the European Union, that we might have an impression that it's all harmonized in the European Union and it's everywhere the same, and everywhere we process the biometric data, the GDPR just applies and it's as simple as that. But it's actually not, of course, because, well, first of all, the national security was never part of the European harmonization, so any kind of use of the biometric data for the public security measures would never be under the GDPR or under any kind of European harmonization, and it's still individual and proper to each member state, so it's different everywhere. And also because the GDPR itself actually allows the member states to make different legislation. First of all, you know, this list of derogations where we say, okay, processing biometric data is prohibited, but it's permitted. And then there is a list. So the GDPR permits the member states to extend this list or to reduce this list. So some states, just like as I said, France, have some exceptions that are not provided by the GDPR, and then there are some exceptions that are provided in the GDPR but that were refused by the member state. And some exceptions provided in the GDPR also demand the member state to adopt a special law in this member state, and that's not the case everywhere. Like the fraud prevention, not all the fraud prevention. Not all the member states have this kind of law. And then one of the most important derogations that exists today, despite all the GDPR harmonization, is the fact that in France, Italy, Spain, and Portugal, the processing and the use of the genetic data for commercial purposes is completely prohibited for other purposes than medical or research, etc. Which means that even the company has got this explicit consent that is really difficult to get, but afterwards still they can't process this genetic data, like any cosmetics company that would like to develop, for example, a cream to go with the skin DNA or something like that. Well, they can't do it in France, Spain, Portugal, or Italy, which is quite strict. So, in the conclusion, I would just like to say that I think the weakness of the biometrics development that could exist today, it's mostly this risk that the biometric element could be disseminated and could be accessed by some unauthorized person, and this could be really bad for the individual. So it's not really about the privacy regulation and not really about the GDPR. It's about the security measures that you put in place to protect your biometrics data and about the trust that you have with your clients. So it all just comes down to this.
Thank you very much, Olga.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I'm open for questions if anybody would like to ask any, now or afterwards.
Do you have question? No? You want me to ask for a question, or you want me to ask a question? So maybe I have few questions. Maybe one. I saw that Europe started to do something. I saw that also that it's hard to have harmonization. You mentioned US, Europe. What about the rest of the world? What are they doing? Are they doing something, if you know? Are they doing something? What are they doing?
Well, a lot of countries, of course, have their own laws about biometrics or just about processing of personal data. I cited European Union and the USA because those are the two law frameworks with which I work day by day. But of course, other countries are doing something, and they have their protective regime. Like in Russia, for example, the protection of personal data is quite strong. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe, one question.
Hello there. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. So, as an extension to the question that was just asked now, if a nation or a government in a particular country, say in Africa, for example now, is involved in the gathering of personal data, including biometrics, and some of those citizens in that particular country are also citizens of countries that are covered by the GDPR, like most European countries. Does that, by default, automatically mean that those governments are either bound or should consider adopting some of the provisions or all of the provisions of the GDPR?
Thank you very much for your question. So it really depends on the situation and on the context. Generally, the GDPR does not apply on the condition of the citizenship, it's more residency. So if some of these African residents are actually living in France and then their government is processing their personal data while they are in France, it's very possible that the GDPR would apply. But if there are some French citizens that are usually and normally living in this African country and the African government is processing their personal data while they are being the residents of this country, there should be no reasons for the GDPR to apply unless there are some other factors involved in the equation. So the GDPR really applies when there is either a controller, either a processor who is established in the European Union, or there is a controller or processor who is established wherever but processes the personal data of the residents of the European Union. And the residency criteria is, well, quite large, but it's mostly anyone who would be in the European Union at the moment. And but if there is just a person who is, for example, I don't know, storing personal data in the European Union, but this person is storing the personal data of the citizens of this African country, for example, on the orders of this African government, then the GDPR would not apply to this person. Only some articles relating to the security and to the fact that he should have a written contract with this African government, but not all of the other provisions.
Okay, thank you very much, Olga. One last question, maybe? No? Okay. So let's jump now to the panel debate. So there is, according to me, and based on the existing and available technologies, there is only one way to guarantee that the physical person trying to access a digital platform is the correct person, and this technology is biometric. So I would like now to discuss with 4 different people the way biometrics could create a really trustable link between physical and digital world. So I will ask Mr. Gilles Bernabeu, Technical Director from Global Platform, to join us. Monsieur Nicolas Raffin, Head of Strategic Marketing and Innovation Payment at IDEMIA. Monsieur Julien Larsonneur, Branch Director France, Fetian Technologies. And Yves Chemla, Co-founder and CTO of United Biometrics. Bonjour. Are you correctly seated on the poof? Is it okay? Let's start. So just one quick comment. Do not forget to use the microphone as I'm using it, putting it close to your mouth, not moving like that. Please do not move like that. So the first question I will already ask with a question. I will start with a question, sorry. For Nicolas, maybe. Okay, Nicolas. Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me correctly? Cool.
So, Nicolas, you heard a lot about biometrics, We saw different use cases: traveling, retail, access, security, etc. What is your perception of biometrics and the different maybe usage you can see from your IDMR perspective? Can you share with the audience, please?
Yes. So first of all, I don't know, maybe 10 marketing session period. IDEMIA is the merger between Morpho and Ouverture Technologies. So basically, biometric solutions on one side for government, police, FBI, very high security, and on the other side, let's say one of the biggest smart card manufacturer in the world. So with IDEMIA, we're blending the two of those worlds, especially to deliver what was in, I think, Alexander's very good slide, a summary of all the use cases that you could imagine of biometrics from a less, let's say, police or high security environment, which is what it has been in the past, to what we, at IDEMIA in particular, but in the industry in general, are trying to take, to bring it to user convenience, also with high security, but for example, facilitating passenger journey in the airport, facilitating the customer journey when opening an account. I remember opening an account 3 years ago, and the guy was just photocopying my passport and then putting all the paper in the binder and then stapling. And then I said, hey, can't you have something more modern? I mean, 2016. And today, for the same bank, we offer them a mobile app where they just scan my passport, and then I take a selfie, and there's a biometric verification to prove that I'm who I am, to open the account in the mobile app in 10 minutes. So this is where we, and in fact, the three presentations before were interesting because it really relates to what us industrial are doing, but also struggling with, which is technology. So it's here. It's coming in our case from very high level security usages down to retail, payment, airport, which is still security. The other presentation from Olga, which is also what us, especially me, marketing person, have to take into account, which is the regulations. Because if we invent nice things and we want to put that to the market, well, we have to cope with the regulations, so better do it in the beginning than afterwards, because you have to redo again what you're doing. And obviously the last presentation, which is the current hype on the market. I also remember 15 years ago when everybody was saying, yeah, mobile is going to kill the card. Well, it's still here. We still produce hundreds of millions of cards every year. I think the annual TAM for payment card is maybe something like 3 billion cards. So we also very much engaged in production of biometrics fingerprint cards. So is it the next step to the card before it is eaten by mobile? We'll see. But really here as well, we use biometrics. I think this is the key aspect. You know, the triangle that Alexander presented, which was convenience, security, and the third one I don't remember, but that's it basically. Convenience, how to use biometrics in the respect of the regulations to provide new customer journeys. This is what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Nicolas. You did a quite long introduction.
Yeah, sorry.
So I had one question. In fact, maybe I should even have started by this question. You could answer what is a digital identity? First, let's start from the beginning. What is a digital identity for you? You have.
I had my time.
Okay. Hi, Yves Chemla speaking. So, for us at United Biometrics, digital identity is something you can use, which is easy to use, which is very nice for the bank to have, for example, or any commerce site or any eGov application, but use the biometrics fundamentals, but protects you. How? How to protect you? What major features that can protect you? First of all, anonymization. Second, templates, biometric templates will be, let's say, hash on a one-way hash solution to barcodes. So whenever you have on your cell phone, mobile device, PC, whatsoever, we are working on any platform you want. And a database working like that, you can have your profile, which is anonymous. You can have your biometrics, which are transformed. And this is very little teeny things that we are moving. It's a question of octet, bytes, to transport. And this is very easy. So this can be used very easily and represent you. But it's not you because we don't know who you are on our database. So that's the first thing I would say on IDs. And after that, for sure, we can hold thousands of transactions per second. And the database, if you are stolen your data, doesn't represent you because this is anonymous ID. And biometrics are not biometrics anymore. So this protects you as well as a user.
Are you saying that there are different levels of digital identities? This is what you are saying?
Okay, yeah, digital identities, for example, whenever we work with military people on human resource servers, they want to have the real thing. They want you to have your biometrics, your face, your fingers, all of them, and every other thing they want to have. But for entering, let's say, ammunition storage, or you don't need the real thing. You just need something that represents you, but protected. You can't say, I'm the Colonel X coming in. You are the ID alpha, with Z, 30 character and more that we have, and then come in and nobody knows. But you can after, on the backyard, if you have an issue, security issue, reconsider with let's say the server, the access server, and you can reconsider and regroup the data to check who really is the intruders.
Maybe, Julien, do you want to add something regarding digital identities? What is your vision at Feitian?
So us at Feitian, we provide mainly dongles or keys, hardware keys that interact with applications on mobile devices. We have smart card readers that have biometrics that deal with match-on cards with existing ID cards, for example, in the Emirates. Okay, and these readers are Bluetooth, so they can interact in mobile environments. We also have the FIDO 2 keys that are now biometrics that will be compliant with Windows Azure AD, which will be very useful for enterprises. So all these scenarios of the dealership of the fingerprint itself, when it's on the smart card, the match on card is the fingerprint is stored on the card itself. So there is Feitian is not dealing with the management of the storage of on the backend server of biometrics and to match it online. Everything is local. Everything is in the card. Everything is in our hardware, which makes it by design GDPR compliant and easier to deploy and trust. So what we want to add on that is biometrics is a convenience. It's not the perfect security, but as long as the biometric is on something that you have every day, can be your card or your key or on your keyring, the security is there by design. So this is our direction right now.
Gilles, do you want to add something?
So I'm from Global Platform, so I'm representing a 100 company creating standards and security certification. So yeah, I think the title of the panel is quite interesting. In fact, you need to interact with digital services. So somewhere you need to have the key to enter inside this world. I think there is a question that was interesting about I need to discuss with my iPad extra. So it's really what you will use to enter into the digital world. And I think the stuff that you will use, today it's mobile phone, tomorrow it can be a watch, after tomorrow it can be something that you will be wearing here. Nobody knows exactly which object will be your digital identity to enter to the digital world, but this object should allow you to enroll. So there was a question about enrollment. You need to be able to enroll on the device and to be able to check on the device. This is the only possibility to clearly provide a good level of protection of the data, because you will be sure that the data, your personal data, are stored inside the device. So after It can be a card, it can be devices, it can be an IoT stuff, it can be whatever you want to use, but this is very important. And I think the digital identity will be this object that you will be able to control, and it's important. And I think I heard about on-off, right? This is exactly what it's about. Okay, this is not maybe a strong security solution, but it's very simple to use. And when you put the finger or your eyes or whatever biometric you want to use, you are allowing this object to represent you on the digital identity world. And I think this is what you need to understand from the discussion, is that biometric is something very simple for any end user, because when you are walking around the world, there is different level of users, right? It's very simple for any user to understand. I put my finger, I put my eyes, I put something, and I'm able to enter inside the digital world. After, these technologies are very flexible, and depending on the use cases, of course, the way that you control the enrollment in a governmental environment, on the army or something else, will be different. Typically, my wife knows my PIN of my card, right? I decided to give the PIN of my banking card to my wife. By the way, my wife didn't give me her PIN, but that's life, right? So typically here, I have decided to give one of my tokens to my wife, and it's my decision. In the banking world, it's accepted that you give your card extra. But of course, in the army world, this kind of use cases will be not possible, and the enrollment will be protected. So you really think to see that as a very flexible way, but at the end of the object that you will use should be very easy to use, should be very some kind of on-off. I accept or I don't accept to share my identity and to start to use the devices. Nicolas?
Yeah, I think we're touching the subject here. My digital identity, I think it's my physical identity for the digital world. So my physical identity, it's me, and all my attributes. All the attributes about me that I will want to share, and as Gilles explained, with some people, and only those few attributes which is them useful for them to know, and not all the rest. And for those other players, I'm going to share those other attributes, and so biometrics might be behind it, not necessarily speaking exclusively, because you might speak of other attributes than biometrics. Biometrics could be the key to enter maybe the physical key, biometric key. Joking with keys today, I mean, all the time we have to be careful how we use the term. So it could be the key to access the key, potentially. It could be biometric, but it could be something else. And really that's the point. So then the question is, do we have only one digital identity? Is it managed by the state, just like my passport is issued by the French state or UK state? And that's the point. Are we going to have multiple digital identities by small clusters, one from the MNOs, one by the banks, one by social security? Or is it going to be just one managed centrally? I think that also has to be about the culture of each country.
This is exactly the next question for me. One question is, you know that some of the Nordics are leveraging banks,
Bank ID.
Like Bank ID. You have government, as you said, that are handling identity.
Like in India, for example?
Exactly. And you just refer to centralized cards where you can store your biometrics. Is it easy to say now that maybe the biometric control is back to the individual? It's one question. The second one is, who do you think should handle this digital biometric identity? Should it be a government, a third party, private, public, banks? How do you see the market? It's not an easy question.
Yeah, depending who you speak to. Is it the citizen? Is it the user, the customer, the corporate representative? Personally, me as a citizen, I would prefer that my government would manage that. Because the question is, can you trust private companies to do that?
I can see already doing like that with Reset.
Another view, of course.
I would say no. Already, French government is doing too much and doesn't have the money to handle it properly. This is personal thought. What I would say is, as we are all traveling here, we are not only French. I believe we've got people from all around the world, meaning what we need to have is let's say, an ID depending on what service you are linked to. For e-gov, maybe your government can do that. For e-banking, whatsoever it is, your bank has to provide your credential and has to monitor it. For example, whenever we deliver a bank, on the database we can tune up to the bank population each threshold of each biometrics that we provide. We can provide a complete carousel of biometrics. All are existing, all are valuable, and for each population you can tune up to your population result to have your false acceptance rates, etc. So this would be very difficult for the government to adjust biometrics. That's the first thing. Second thing, how many transactions per day is the government able to handle? So we have been testing our solution with IBM facilities here in Europe. They are moving from Noisy to Nice, very close to you now. And how to handle for each bank 2,000 to 3,000 transactions per second for each bank. So if the government has to do that in a privacy, I wouldn't say how would they do it. How much power, who's going to pay for it? The bank has to pay a fee every month for each transaction.
I wasn't mentioning transactions like payment transactions, but
sorry.
Imagine every day all the information you share with one entity who is asking for one small information, and you have to give, for example, a copy of your passport, or if you have to say I'm above 18 years old. What are you going to say to prove it? You are going to send maybe a picture of your passport or something like that. Why they just need to ask or a database, for example, and get a yes or no. So you see, my point is about how you expose yourself with too much information compared to what you should be sending. And this is what I mean with the term of attributes of my digital identity. It's composed of maybe 25, 26 core attributes, and I will share only the ones that I need to share depending on the question I receive, and not the whole stuff. If I want to apply for a mortgage, or even if I want to rent a flat, am I going to give all my information, or they just need to know that my salary is big enough to pay for the rent? Point of all. Think about it yourself in the audience. In many cases where you're asked for an information, how many useless information you share accidentally to the service provider, and those information become, you don't really know what. And that's the point of tomorrow's digital identity, where potentially the model would be that you share only the information that you need to share and not more.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but if you take the case of your profile is anonymous, your biometrics are just a representation about biometrics, finally you don't give anything. Because what we have as well is all biometrics, even physical, are revocable. So we can, let's say, almost in a click, reconstruct a complete database with new information. So even if stolen, it doesn't matter, because it won't be available anymore. It won't be, let's say, at the minute we see that there is one intrusion on the system, we can reconsider and reconfigure all the database, meaning you don't give anything with our solution, you don't give anything to anyone. You keep your own biometrics for yourself, but we use an image of something. That's why it's very flexible.
Yeah, I would like just to clarify this point, because in fact, digital identity will be created by different service providers that you are using. Some may use information from the other because it's your government, so I trust more extra, right? So in one end, you have the digital identity. What we foresee on the market today, and typically we talk about FIDO, which is a good example, is that there is a strong differences between how you authenticate the people, and this is where the biometrics will apply. So how you authenticate, and when you are authenticated, what you will be able to use, right? So I think this is very important to understand that when you are on your smartphone and putting your finger, you are authenticated and the smartphone verifies that it's you, or at least the one that primary enroll. And based on that, then you go to a service provider to get the digital identity. I think this is very important because it's a big change on the market in the last, I don't know, FIDO, it's what, 5 years, 6 years, where people have decided, okay, we cannot manage all the federal identity from A to Z. We will focus on authentication. And I think biometrics plays strong role to allow the end user to really control the authentication part. After you get access to the service, and this is where you have this discussion about, okay, I'm opening my digital identity, how much I want to share, not share. And I think this is why you are consistent, both of you, because one, you are talking about the authentication, where nobody needs to know your finger to know who you are until something which is verified, certified, extra, show that yes, it's really you. Then when it's you, then you go to the digital identity and then you can discuss how you want to share the digital identity or not share or open some digital services.
And Jill, just one point to answer you. I agree, but at the same time you have new services, and I'm referring to financial services, where they are asked to provide KYC, AML, and as the industry is not ready to provide digital identity, you have to bring your physical ID like that, and you take a picture of you, and you are sharing documents. It seems that it is there is a gap between the digital world and the physical world, and the bridge at the moment is something that is not convenient, let's say. Where do you see biometric involvement more interesting for this type of usages? And there is a strong pressure.
No, but typically biometric will not play about how you create the digital identity. Biometric apply before how you authenticate the end user. So you can have plenty of fancy stuff with the eyes, the 3D face and extra. You are not managing about how to create the digital identity. After how to create the digital identity, this is where more exchanges between people that have information will be needed to remove that. The KYC, typically, it's better to have to read the chip which is inside the passport than trying to scan the passport and to try to analyze things which are completely crazy, knowing that the information are here. So I think we really need to separate digital identity and the evolution of the digital identity and how the biometric will ease the usage of the digital identity by the end user.
It's also because, during the registration, this is where is a fake point, because you could say you are someone with some fake document, and then you are recorded as a genuine guy, which is not the case.
No, but the enrollment is very important. And when you are matching the thing that has been provided to a digital entity is very important. But again, my wife knows my PIN, I don't have any problem in these use cases. So that shows that in some cases, you need to have a one-to-one. In some cases, you want to have one-to-many. It's not an issue. So the enrollment, how to bind the authentication to the service is very important. So typically, if you look FIDO, I'm not from FIDO, but if you look FIDO, you first authenticate to your digital service. And the digital service understand that, oh, you have a FIDO token, then from now on, I can accept this FIDO token, so this authentication mechanism based on biometrics, as a replacement of your login, password, and extra. The digital identity has been created by the bank using either fancy stuff, either very old stuff. But after, you are just binding that because you are first connected. So this is one model. Other model may be more complex to say that you need to be in person to show all the paper and extra and to bind the way that you want to use using biometry and with the digital identity.
Yes, regarding on the banking segment, they don't want their customers to be present in the office to enroll their fingerprints on the card, on the biometric payment card that are already in pilot test everywhere. We saw Gemalto with Intesa San Paulo doing that. So the banks are open from 9 till 3 p.m. and everybody is working during this time. So the banks, they have to allow their end users, the customers, to enroll by themselves at home because it costs a lot of money for them to manage that on site. So this is why having the enrollment process at home has to be managed in different ways according to where it adds value. It adds value for the bank to do that on site for the customers. But of course, if you have to like register fingerprint locally on a key or a card, and if it deals with government IDs, maybe at the enrollment process it would be nice to have a national officer, like in a city hall, just to be present there, to do the enrollment and stipulate that it has been done in person, and after you can manage the things. And also there's all the problem of the biometric databases in Africa, for example. They have been done 15 years ago, they are not updated, they are not compliant, they are not in the same format. They have to buy expensive tablets to collect all the biometrics on site in offline mode and get it back to the databases and make everything match. And this costs a lot of money, and it adds a lot of intermediaries in the collection of the biometrics on the field, which by design makes it less secure. So many people are having your biometrics from point A to B. So my feeling about it is the more the end users have the control of the biometrics and the less intermediaries there are just to access to authenticate, like FIDO enables right now, by design it's more secure. So yes, there is a paradigm shift right now in ID and what we can do with, especially with standardization of protocols with WebAuthn and CTAP and all the cool stuff that FIDO enables right now can be extended in a very large way. Like contactless payments with a biometrics on it, you don't have any limitation on the amount. Like we have a limit right now to pay contactless with 30 euros. So if you have the biometrics after, you can pay 400, 1,000 euro, whatever. So that's my point on it.
Okay. Yves?
I would like to add one comment. FIDO is something great. You've got 3,000 and more company going FIDOs, but in this case, you cannot control your threshold on any biometrics. You cannot change it. It's in the app. If you want to do multi-factor authentication using SDK, imagine the application plus 1, 2, 3, 4 SDK on top. And we are not working this way. I think API is the future. A bank will have one application for you to try to have a loan and simulate something to buy a house. Then you would have your web banking application, can be called through an API thing. And as well, so any other application the bank would have can call an API. And we are in the world of API for easy integration. And what we are doing with our bank customers is deploying the system with an app for biometrics authentication that can be called by any bank service on our app. So meaning you have one app where you enroll, but you don't see it because the look and feel and the color and how your let's say your typo is, and everything is matching the look and feel of the bank, but you can be called by any app, and this is very easy to maintain because if we want to upgrade our app, we can be sure it has to be tested by the bank, but as well, the bank doesn't have to redeploy its apps and embed all SDK level around the app. So it makes the thing much more simpler to use and fast to use. So that's how do we provide that? And I think that the flexibility as well to be easy integrated to a system is going much faster and more, let's say, easy to use to deploy.
Thank you, Yves. Maybe we have a question. Are you sleeping?
Was it so nice what we said? Does that make you sleep?
Of course, I have one question.
I'm sure you do.
I have one question because maybe I didn't correctly understand the description of digital identity, but what I do, and maybe there is no stupid question, you will see. But the first one is, should I have one single digital identity? Or should I have many? And in that case, I'm a little bit back, Gilles, on what I was trying to understand at the beginning, is who should handle what, and how many digital identity I will share on the digital ecosystem. Gilles.
Why me? Why me? Well, after it's really based on the culture and based of your lifestyle, because potentially you are one unique guy, potentially you have a different life, and you want to separate and segregate the different lives. So digital identity, it's really how you want to be perceived in the digital world like you are perceived in the real world, right? So today, I don't know, if you are playing a sport, you may have a nickname on the sport that you don't want the guys on the job to understand your nickname. So yes, maybe one day you will have your own digital identity with plenty of power and you will be able to share, but I think this will take a lot of time, and I suppose that it will be more easy to have a different digital identity after. How many digital identity? That for me really depend of your life, and I don't know your life.
I would give one comment on that. PSD2 is on the way in Europe and will be deployed, if ever it happen, by September next year. So, and I don't see bank with a federate project to do such. So if you have two banks account, or you have your company bank account and your personal bank account, you're gonna have for sure a digital ID for any of the service you want to apply. That's as secure as that and as different as that.
Yeah.
Nicolas?
Digital, it's not the title, but that could be digital identity for the digital world. So I would say digital worlds in a plural. What are your digital worlds? Social network, so the way you interact on social network, the way you want to say who you are or remain anonymous, say the age you have, if you want to go into children forums and so on, be controlled. Are you a digital citizen? Are you a digital consumer? Are you a digital traveler? Are you a digital buyer? So you see, it's a connection of digital worlds in plural, and I imagine you get a set of attributes that you will use. Still, my idea of attributes that you will use in each of those digital worlds, and sometimes it will be the same, sometimes they will be different, but that would be the concept, I think.
Yeah, and maybe it is one question we'll try to answer in the next debate, because you were talking about decentralized, so to have your data personally in your card, and in that case you can handle the way you will derive your digital identity, or you can imagine there is a centralized database, is what you were saying. In that case, we need to have somewhere a centralized global database. I think it's quite hard to do. And the other one is to use distributed ledger, so maybe another layer.
Yeah. And exactly as Gilles explained, if it's a key, if it's a phone with face recognition of it, if it's a card with a fingerprint on it, it's a key to access the service, and the service itself might be on a blockchain, for example. That's another story, but the key to access it would be one of those tools that we explain and that we manufacture.
One question from the audience? No? Yeah.
Thank you for the interesting discussion. Going back to the topic of biometrics and digital identity, biometrics always can have failures in the enrollment process, right? Failure to capture, or failure to acquire, or failure to enroll, which could lead to persons maybe not participating in this whole environment of having a digital identity, maybe even a possibility of excluding them from accessing certain services. I would be interested to hear your perspective on this aspect of the biometrics in relation to identity.
So, first of all, it's something new, because even though the biometrics, it's a very old technology, biometrics were used in the field of government, which is one to many. And it's clear that today we don't have the right tool to fully test, as an example, this new stuff that you have on your smartphone, on your watch, and extra. So this is a field where there is a lot of debate currently on the standardization world, a lot of fight about how to measure. And we have something to manage now that was not to be managed before, is GDPR. So before, people were sharing database of biometrics, and you were testing your product towards this database. Today, it's not possible to have a database of biometrics. So currently, there is a lot of debate in FIDO. There is some international technical communities that are working about how to test and to ensure that all the products are often provide similar or different level of quality. And this is very important. So I suppose that soon we will be able to have something more stable about the quality of the performance, and the end user may understand that this gives you 1 star and this gives you 5 star in terms of enrollment and in terms of very matching what you are able to provide to the system and the system is able to provide to you. Today the issue is that if you are buying a very fancy phone and the phone did not recognize you, you are not super happy, right? Because you pay and you put your finger in the system. So I don't know if you have friends using some smartphone where the system was not really well managed. After 3 days, they say that, what? I will not use it, right? So this is the issue that it's ending. I hope that will be end soon, but we are working on. And this will be one part of your response, how to be sure that the system plays the role it's supposed to do. Yves?
I would like to address another point. For example, whenever you're gonna have to enter in the PSD2 format, you're gonna have to give your consent to use biometrics. If you refuse, we are to offer an alternative, okay? And it can be provided with a long form PIN code, for example, or an easy lock pattern that we provide. So that's the thing to answer to people who don't want to give their consent to use biometrics. So that was the thing I wanted to add on that.
Nicolas?
Yeah, I heard the word inclusion. I think your question was also about inclusion, exclusion. How am I not excluded from this digital world? I think there's one term that everybody knows, which is financial inclusion. And I think biometric play a prominent role in enabling this. I mean, you can have a look at the situation in India or other countries who are using biometrics precisely to include people into financial services while they were excluded. And sometimes it's all about literacy. I mean, we've got cases of people queuing every month to get the monthly salary, and because they're not able to type in a 4-digit PIN, they have to queue to get the money. So the idea would be to replace that with biometrics, or in remote villages to enroll people so that they don't even have an identity. They were not even officially born, you know, in some remote provinces. So biometrics here is playing a role of engaging those people as citizens in the financial and also social world. And I think biometrics have a stone into that.
Julien?
And also to manage the rejection rate. If you have a key that has, I would say, governmental purpose, okay, on which you use your biometric, and if it doesn't work, or if your finger has been cut, or if all your fingers have been cut, all these things, of course you can derive with a PIN or other things. But as Google did already with when they endorsed Feitian and also Ubico for their advanced protection program, is that at the very beginning you want to put a high level of security on your account, and you register 2 keys. Register 2 keys on which can be verified by an officer or somebody that has the power to say it's right. And if you lose 1 key, or if 1 key gives you reject rates, you have another one as a backup. So meaning that you keep it safe this way, and this is how Google decided to do it, just with U2F, with not FIDO2, no biometrics. But even if we have U2F biometrics. So yeah, it's another way to bypass the problem that you just raised right now.
Yeah, I would like to come back on biometrics basics. why do we have a multi-factor biometrics authentication? Is because, for example, 3% of the population doesn't have fingerprints working for many reasons. Their work or just a biological thing, which is, let's say, conductivity of the skin. So it doesn't work with sensors. After, we've got problems with dark skins and light because we don't have contrast on faces. That's why we are to offer, depending of the country, depending of the bank, depending of the project, multi-factor authentication. And if you are only reliable on one only, you're going to have a part of the population which is going to be outside of your program. So that's why you need as many biometrics as possible. And if you don't have that, you're going to lose people and they are not going to go on the train with you. So you need to bring them on board and with whatever biometrics you can use, and after you have to have something to manage that, because an SDK can manage the biometrics is targeting on, and a sensor, if a sensor is not working, the SDK might see it, but how are you going to detect it? You need an error code going on a central database somewhere to check, this guy got a problem with his fingerprint or with his camera for face recognition. Therefore, you see that the camera is broken, and therefore, either you decrease the level, either you stop, you delete the biometrics, the concerned biometrics, and then for the person can come in with another biometrics to be enrolled with. So we have to be very concerned about deploying, let's say, those systems on smartphones and how to control that. When I say smartphone, can be your PC, can be your whatever device, even smart card. So we have to be very careful how to follow up on customer after they enroll.
Okay, thank you, Yves. Is it answering? Yeah? Another question? So, short answer.
It's more a remark, a follow-up remark. Thank you for the questions. I think it's an important topic while introducing biometrics into identity schemes, as it may also lead to exclusion of certain groups. For example, we know that biometrics don't work very well for infants or for elderly people. They're susceptible to aging. So while these technologies are being integrated in digital identity schemes, let's say, we should make sure as an industry that it doesn't lead to exclusion of certain groups or the other way around. Ensure full inclusion. Thank you.
One additional question? Okay. So thank you very much for the panelists. So, please do not leave. We still have one speaker and one round table. So, we had a question regarding mobile few minutes ago, and I can see that everyone is using a mobile. I also said that card is not dead, so I would like now David Benini to discuss the way mobile biometric authentication solution will improve liveness detection and overall security. So David Benini, it's over to you.
Okay. Feels good to stand up. Good afternoon, everyone. Guess we'll keep it rolling here. So my name is Dave Benini. I work for a company called Aware. We're a biometrics software and solutions company. We've been around since the early 90s. We provide mobile biometric authentication solutions. And I'm going to be talking about mobile facial biometrics and kind of delve into liveness detection for a little bit. What I'm really going to talk about is algorithms. So, you know, why are we talking about this? Well, this is really why, is because passwords have passed their utility to a large degree. Nobody likes them. We heard before about how important the customer experience is, and really there's not much worse than forgetting a password and that whole nightmare that we've all been through 1,000 times. But there's also huge financial impact. The statistics are pretty staggering on how much revenue is lost to people abandoning purchases either because they can't remember their password or they just don't even feel like entering it. So that's what we're really here to talk about. And since it's easy to bash on passwords, I'll do it a little bit more. I mean, they're just from an era that is gone, and it's time to come up with something better. So facial recognition for mobile authentication. Well, here's the good and the bad. As we've heard, they're ideal in many ways. They're accurate, which I'm going to get into, but they're also very familiar and very convenient. And again, in terms of customer experience, who doesn't like taking their facial image of themselves? You know, it's a great experience. The bad news here is that they're relatively easy to spoof, as we've heard. And one of the reasons is because there are literally trillions of digital images of faces out there in the world that could potentially be used as a spoof. So I'm going to start getting into algorithms and kind of an algorithm perspective and what we think about when we're developing these algorithms. So as we're going to hear, they have to be spoof-proof, which means no attack vulnerabilities. They need to be secure, which is essentially no false matches. And they need to be convenient, which is a bunch of things. It's no false non-matches, no failures to capture, and it just has to be fast, easy, and it just has to work everywhere. But now we've heard a little bit about this before already, so what are we trying to do with biometrics, right? So we're really just trying to change the economics of attack. We heard already there's no perfect biometric. It doesn't work every single time. But we can really change the ROI for the fraudster in terms of time, risk, expense it takes to try to defeat the security mechanism. And to put it another way, we're just trying to make this attack more trouble than it's worth. But we're not going to try to make it impossible. So getting into facial biometrics, I like to remind folks that there's multiple use cases, as we've heard. I tend to put them in two buckets. One is mobile authentication, which is when you're matching to your enrolled sample. The other is mobile onboarding, and this enters into a whole other set of use cases. You know, we've got customers that they're not even worried about biometrics yet. They just want to capture a face of an individual that they know is live and real and not a false image. They might also use it to match to a driver's license or a passport or some other kind of ID. So there's lots of applications out there, and they tend to have different requirements for liveness detection. And facial matching is kind of interesting. I think we heard about it before, but 10 years ago they were kind of in third place behind fingerprints and iris. People were kind of down on facial biometrics. But then two things happened. Everybody got a really good camera in their pocket, and machine learning went pretty mainstream. So those two things have combined to make the performance of the biometric matching algorithm really, really good. And I think you see that in the field. So I think the news here is, the facial biometrics are extremely accurate. In terms of algorithms, they work really, really well. And in the algorithm world, we're turning our attention now more to user convenience and to anti-spoofing. So what do we mean by convenience? Well, to me, I thought about this a little bit. On the left here, what do we have? We have tried and true biometric. This is kind of old school fingerprint cards. Well, there is a ton of data there, but that was professionally captured by somebody who's trained to do this, and they do it for a living. On the right, we have a selfie. So on the left, we have a whole lot of signal, lots and lots of data, but on the right, we have a lot of noise. So again, from an algorithm perspective, convenience is really about lowering the bar for the quality and the quantity of data that you're working with. And that's kind of the reality that we live in when we're developing these algorithms for matching and for liveness. So convenience is essential, but creates challenges, as we're talking about. They have to work in a low SNR environment, and they have to be fast, easy, as we've said already, regardless of the environment, the user preferences, and whatnot. So getting a little deeper into liveness, what is it? Why is it important? Well, let's think about it for a second. The security of biometrics must not depend on secrecy, right? So biometrics aren't really secrets. I mean, you're looking at my biometrics, they're right here. I'm speaking my biometric data. It's out there. What makes biometrics kind of cool and magic is that they're useful when they're inherent. They're part of us, which means that they're ergonomically viable to present in a way that's easy and convenient. But we also need to be able to sense them, right? We need to be able to create sensors that can collect that data. But they also have to be unique, so they can't be easy to reproduce. And so this is really what spoofing is all about, is protecting their uniqueness. You can't just be able to take a photograph of somebody and use it as their biometric. And so that's what liveness is about, if it's not totally obvious. So there's lots of different methods to spoofing, as you might imagine. I'm just going to touch on them. But for facial recognition, you can use simply a paper image. You can use a paper with cutouts in the eyes and the mouth, because the eyes and mouth are sometimes used to detect liveness. You can use a digital still image or digital video stream. And then there's these 3D techniques. You can use a 3D mask with cutouts, a mannequin. And so this is what they look like, right? So this is a genuine image. This is what you want. It's high quality, it's well lit, it's high resolution, it's a plain expression. But this is what you get. We've got pictures of pictures, digital and paper. And with no liveness detection, these will match really, really well. Our algorithms are designed to match these images, because we want to be able to match to images that may not be the most amazing quality. So those will absolutely match without liveness. We even get into stuff like this, and believe me, customers want us to be able to detect all this kind of crazy stuff that doesn't look like, something that we would fall for as a facial image, but it's actually hard to detect some of these things with liveness detection algorithms, believe it or not. So what you end up having to do is really use lots and lots of different algorithms, lots of different techniques to try to find all these different features, such as these cutouts. And I know it looks a little ridiculous, but this is what our customers are presenting to us and requiring that we find. So there's also lots of different, as I said, there's lots of different ways we have to go after this. I mean, so this mask on the right, I mean, these things look a little bit ridiculous again, but this mask on the right, you can take a photograph of somebody and send it to a company, and they will send you for $300 or so a mask that looks, a 3D mask. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick or so. And, that is really hard to detect, I can tell you. So it's a hard problem. The algorithms needed are complex. The data is noisy. And again, we get into these issues of user convenience and user experience. We just don't want it. We don't want to require the user to have to do more than he wants to do. It's just a non-starter when you start interfering with their user experience. Friction, bad. So solving the problem, there's lots of techniques, and I wasn't planning to get into all these today because it gets kind of, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. There's the active, what we call active techniques, which are really about challenges and physical challenge response. You tell the user to blink, smile, turn their head, move their device, do something. And these are fine, but they're requiring the user to do something, and it degrades the user experience. So then there's passive approaches that we're applying to, in the background, essentially. We're just looking at the image stream, or we're doing something to try to detect that it looks fishy, it looks like it's not a live image. Machine learning is absolutely playing a role in this, just as it has with matching algorithms. We're seeing it play a pretty important role in liveness as well, and it's going to continue that trend, particularly in this passive area. So I like comparing all the different biometric modalities to superheroes, because as we know about superheroes, they all got their kind of special talents, but they've also got a special weakness. But when you get them all together is when you can really do some pretty interesting things. And biometrics are very similar in that way. They just help each other in ways that are exponential when you start adding them. So the impact is exponential. Now, let's see if my video works here. So this is an example of multimodal approaches, and this is what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on, because we think this is one of the really best ways to attack not only biometric performance and convenience, but also the liveness detection. So here we're collecting face and voice at the same time. And then over here we're doing face and keystroke. So in this example on the left, I said my passphrase while my face was being collected, and on the right, I was typing my username while my face was being collected in the background. And so starting with face and voice, I'll get into this a bit more, but you get much better performance in terms of biometric matching, but you're still leveraging these generic sensors that we can utilize on every phone, whether it's got a touch ID or face ID or whatever. We don't have to rely on the vendor of the equipment to dictate our customer, our security and our user experience. We can also make it, when you add voice, now granted, face, there are vulnerabilities in terms of liveness and they're being addressed, but you throw a voice in there and it really complicates things for a potential fraudster, and again, changes the economics of that attack. So just a real quick, I'll try to make this quick, but in terms of biometric matching algorithm performance, you'd like your line to be down there. That's really convenient and really secure. You don't want it to be out here because that's less convenient and less secure in terms of false match rate and false non-match rate. Where you end up is a line somewhere in the middle, and you achieve your trade-off between convenience and security by sliding your threshold around. And that's how you achieve your trade-off. So higher security, less convenient, you're getting these false non-matches. And lower security, more convenient, you're getting more false matches. It's less secure because a stranger is essentially getting passed as you. So looking at the performance of voice. So voice is up, performs, and these are, these numbers are, these are accurate, but I'm really just showing these just to show how they relate to one another. So the requirement for matching is down here, at least specified by FIDO. So that's one spec we can use. Voice by itself doesn't really reach it, and face does. So face is down lower, closer to the happy face, at about 1 in 100 or so false non-match with a 1 in 10,000 false match rate. When you add face and voice, you get about 8.5x improvement in the matching performance. So now we've gone from roughly 1 in 100 false non-matches to 1 in 800, and that's a significant boost in performance, biometric performance, without really suffering much in the way of user experience or time. So we can also layer on voice spoof detection. We can, because we still want to detect those, and that's what we do. We add another layer of spoof detection onto the voice side of things to detect when people are trying to pass a recorded voice, let's say. Or if you've never heard of Lyrebird.ai, you can go on there and create your own vocal avatar. So you can go check that out. It's actually kind of cool. But text-to-speech generators, we're seeing more and more that you can take people's voice who's out in the public domain and basically make them say whatever you want, and so that's a concern. Now the performance of voice spoof detection, it's okay. It's not great yet, but this is a nascent technology. It's still improving, and I think in 5 years you're going to see very substantial improvements here. Again, it's following the path of a lot of the matching algorithms. 10 years ago, where things took some time to be optimized, and machine learning will definitely accelerate this. Keystroke dynamics is kind of interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen it or played with it. It basically takes measurements of the time between keys, how long you press it, how long there are between key strokes. And over time, those keystroke dynamics are unique to you to some degree. Now again, the performance of keystroke dynamics right now is okay. It's not like you wouldn't use it. You probably wouldn't use it by itself as an authenticator. Although if you have a really long string, it performs pretty well. You think about it. How many times does somebody else type your email address? You really do have a very unique way of typing that, and that's what gets picked up here. But the same way voice improves the performance of face, keystroke, it just helps with facial matching performance. It makes it better, and it also adds another, a really tough spoof prevention capability, because it's really hard to spoof this. How am I going to spoof your keystroke? So it's another area that we're kind of headed, and I think what we think is in the next several years we will see passwords eventually reach a point where they're just not used that much anymore. Certainly, well, maybe they'll be used in conjunction with other features like biometrics. And we think facial biometrics are going to have a really big role, at least in the mobile authentication world. And so far, it seems to be going that way. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thanks for sticking around.
Thank you, David.
How'd I do?
So, thank you.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. So my question is this. We all know that smartphones, for example, have the technology and the engineering that has gone into them has advanced by leaps and bounds, by an order of magnitude. We take benchmarking apps and we can see how far they have evolved. But I still believe that some of these ideas and concepts may still present, I may be wrong, may still present some challenges when we combine them together for that user experience, because we want something done here and now and as quickly as possible. What is your perception over the next, between now and the next 2 or 3 years as to the adoptability of a combination of these technologies that we're looking at and other ones that we may not even have thought of yet? Thank you.
Yeah, so if I understand that question correctly, part of the motivation for companies like ours to get into this is because there are applications for mobile biometric authentication that you don't want to outsource the problem to the device manufacturer, the Apples and the Samsungs of the world. You want your user experience to be consistent over the entire device, device world. You want to have some insight into what the security actually is. It's very hard to test. We're trusting Apple and Samsung because they're big companies, but we don't really know exactly how they're working all the time, and they don't tell us too much about how they've been tested or how they work. So there are just higher security applications that require, that really have an interest in using technologies like this that are independent of the device. And I think you were talking a bit about the emerging technologies. I mean, I'm seeing it's been a really interesting market because it's just evolved so radically in the last 15 years. Honestly, in the year 2000, it was really all about law enforcement and police and mugshots, and now we've all got a biometric in our pocket. And I'm just seeing the technology continue to evolve just like it did 10 years ago when we were doing facial matching for more like civil applications. It's evolving. These algorithms take a lot of time, and you can see how complicated it must be to detect some of the things that we're trying to find. It's evolving. It's evolving quickly, though, and I think in 5 years it's going to be it's just going to be part of our lives. Is that helpful? I don't know.
Is it answering?
Well, yes, but the other part is that just as the technologies are evolving and usability is also evolving, those who are also trying to circumvent those technologies are not also sleeping. So they are also trying to play catch up as well. So just as the algorithms are improving as well, what do you see that can be done to widen that gap between the genuine use cases for these technologies and those who are trying to circumvent?
Well, this was it. So liveness detection, obviously, voice, like I was saying, these are things that are just kind of coming now. These are somewhat new. voice spoof detection, all this liveness detection that's going on. There's lots of different techniques to do it. They're all emerging, but also the multimodal. I mean, that again, for authentication is somewhat new, and I think that's one of the ways you're going to see us kind of continue to maintain that gap from the fraudsters. Because like I said, it is really hard to spoof. We're trying to just make it harder and harder to spoof. And I think keystroke plus face, for example, is one way that we're going to see that happen.
David, one question in front of you.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello. I don't know whether this is a silly question or not, but if everyone is recording their facial identity in their device, is it not feasible to fish all those devices and capture a massive database of everyone's face, and then you get into this dystopic future where, because visual face detection is the easiest biometric, right? Because you can't just scan someone, you can't scan their thumbprint or their fingerprint as you walk past them, but you can scan their face. So is there not a public identity issue here in terms of the protection of that key data?
Yeah, that's a complicated question. There's some ways that we address that. One was with FIDO. So for example, you may have heard a little bit about FIDO today. So FIDO stores all the biometric data on the phone. It never leaves the phone. It's really just used to perform a challenge response to release the private key that's on the phone and satisfy that PKI challenge with the server. But no, certainly with facial images, and we're seeing this happen in certain parts of the world where facial images can be used. I mean, how do you think of? I think of privacy as being able to compartmentalize my life, right? So I have my social life, and I have my work life, and I have my student life, and if I can, use a facial image to connect the dots there and learn about different parts of your life, even though you didn't really give me permission to learn about that part of your life, that's a threat to privacy, and that's one way that people are concerned that facial images in big databases could be used, and it's something we have to keep our minds on.
David, the last question on your right side.
Yeah, thank you for the interesting presentation. Some weeks ago, I had a meeting with a bank who was considering to adopt face recognition and liveness detection, and they were struggling. I mean, there are so many algorithms and systems and vendors on the market, and they were struggling to make a selection of a vendor. So which is the, forget about price, but in terms of performance. Would you have any advice in regards to that?
Yeah, well, it's hard. It's hard because it's hard to test biometrics. It's very difficult to compare apples to apples between two different vendors. So I mentioned FIDO, I'll mention FIDO again. One thing that they're doing, which is kind of interesting, is creating specifications for not only biometric match performance, but also liveness detection, or presentation attack detection, as they call it. So they've published requirements that say this is how you have to perform, and there's labs that have signed on to independently verify that the various vendors are satisfying those requirements. So that's one way. And we see like you probably see a wide variety in how dirty banks or whatever customer wants to get their hands on biometrics. They're really going to test them. I mean, I find the best customer is a guy that really challenges you and sends us all those goofy pictures and is really vested in working together, collaborating, sharing the data that they have. So that's another piece of advice. I'd always ask a customer to share their data with their vendor and help them with that, because we that's where we get data, is from customers.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
So you know what? I'm a little bit late, but you are extremely lucky. We have a crazy panel debate now, because if you heard about distributed ledger, you heard about these guys. So I would like now, and you saw that in the previous presentation we discussed a lot about centralized, decentralized. I would like now to invite on stage Mr. James Tickland, CEO of Veridium ID. And we have the chance to have Mr. Lin Per from ASEAN Partner. He's working for Hyper, which is one of the famous distributed ledger. So I'm sure you prepare your question.
Thank you.
So maybe James and Per, you can present again yourself, describing more in detail what you are exactly doing within this specific technology space to allow our audience to understand.
Okay, yeah, I have, since we learned to know each other, I have quite a few more hats on my head now. I'm former member of the IOTA Foundation, which you might have heard about. I advise about 9 different ICOs, blockchain, distributed ledger technologies. I'm heavily involved in DAG, directed acyclic graph. Let's not go into that. And then some other consultancy deals where we're marrying privacy by design. This is a project in Denmark going on right now, which is basically National Digital Identity 3.0, where all the problems that you've heard about with the digital identity here that was in the previous panel will basically be resolved, but not for the reasons that they were talking about. They're going to be solved the right reason, by privacy by design, so we don't have the GDPR issues. So that's a little bit about me. I'm old IBM, 19 years in US, 10 years in UK, and now 17 years in Bangkok. And my area of expertise is more ASEAN or Southeast Asia.
Thank you, Per.
Yes, so James Stickland, I'm the CEO of Iridium. I'm also former IBM, so 10 years at IBM. And previous to this, I was at JP Morgan and HSBC. So I was quite interested to hear a lot of opinion about what financial services companies do and believe and kind of see. And I've been fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to be carrying some of the scars of those dialogues. So Iridium's an authentication company, biometric specialism. We've got a huge focus on storage, maintenance and management of biometrics. So while we're a platform company delivering authentication and using biometrics as the kind of form of authentication, irrefutable form of authentication, we have a big drive on how we use the blockchain to be effective with the storage and utilization of your biometrics. So who's the sovereign and who's the authority?
So I don't know what is the level of the audience, but maybe we can come back to the basis. So can you maybe, Per, explain the difference between centralized database, blockchain, and distributed ledger?
Yeah, but not in 5 minutes. But we've had a lot of. So I've been in the blockchain area for about 9.5 years. I started mining Bitcoin at an early stage. I got a little bit frustrated with Bitcoin because they weren't really living up to what the promise was. Now the difference between a centralized database is obviously a centralized database where you just have a single point of attack. That's dangerous now because we got a lot of clever hackers. If you distribute the network, so there's not just one point. This was what the brilliant thing about the Bitcoin was Toshiko Nakamoto or whatever, whoever he is, or they are, or whatever. They had a very clever way of basically making it so you had no single point of attack. And that's really, that's the whole essence in what you're trying to do with distributed ledgers. Call it blockchain, call it whatever you want. I mean, but there are subtle differences. I work with the DAG structure because it's much more scalable. So if you take, let's compare, because you probably know, so MasterCard can do 60,000 transactions per second. I think there was 66,000 2 Christmases ago on Black Friday or whatever, was their maximum. Bitcoin can do 7 to 12. There's been some improvements. Ethereum can do 14 to 20. how are they going to be a POS solution ever, right? Then it's better to have a centralized database where you have a trust partner that can do the transactions. Now, we are beginning to see, I'm working together with funnily enough, a Chinese company that has just proven in a lab 1 million transactions per second in a DHE environment. I'm working with another one. We're working on a what we call a stable coin. So if you're not too familiar with distributed ledger, cryptocurrency and stuff like that, it might be a little bit too much information overload. But the essential points that we want to get at is what we need this for. And having been at IBM selling AS400, that tells you how old I am, and DB2 databases. When we're looking at, my litmus test always, when you looking at the usability of blockchain, distributed ledger, any kind of technology like that is, can you do it with a database? Well, so why do you need distributed ledger? If you can do it quicker, cheaper, faster, possibly not more secure. So it depends on what, and we're seeing, now we have, I think it's 2,500 different cryptocurrency with altcoins and stuff like that. We got probably about 250 different distributed ledger, blockchain, whatever technologies that are coming out. You have Hashgraph, you have a lot of different things. But what I'm seeing in my expertise traveling around the world is we're beginning to see the siloing of distributed ledger and blockchain. So yes, I have Bitcoin. Now Bitcoin is good for high value storage and high value transactions. I don't have a problem with that. But it doesn't work in a POS system where you need if you need to get a transaction through, you could be basically standing in the store for 45 minutes waiting for your transaction to get through. Coming back to customer experience, I don't think that doesn't work well today. So those are some of the things.
Okay, maybe James, you can explain us how your company moved from a traditional biometric storage, let's say, to this new generation of storage, and what is, according to you, driving the request from your client?
Yeah, and I echo Per's thoughts that this is there's a right medium, there's a right means for purpose and for the relevant use case. So my big focus with Veridium was like who's actually accountable, who's responsible, and who has access to your own biometrics. So a lot of the panels that previously spoke about building your digital identity, how many of your digital identities are out there today that you would trust with your biometrics? It's bad enough that credit bureaus are being targeted as a central DB and having your fraud or your history stolen so that you can be recreated digitally from a credit standpoint. Imagine that was your biometrics. Imagine the custodian, a central custodian, owned your biometrics, your voices, your fingerprints, your faces, whatever it might be. I'm not sure I'd even feel comfortable with my bank, and I've been in a bank. I've been in numerous banks. And I'm not sure I could now look back and say I'd be super comfortable with them being a custodian of me. Would I want that central opportunity for nation-state funded attacks to go, target JP Morgan Chase? Well, look, with enough brute force, everything's crackable, right? So my view was, actually, if we're going to be intelligent with our biometrics, let's get in front of it now rather than wait for the event where we all start to get smart post kind of apocalyptic event. So what we built was a focus on how you can use the blockchain effectively to be able to own your own biometrics. So we're part of a group called Sovereign, which is about we're a founding custodian of that group, which allows us to build an authorization capability to be able to manage biometrics. So you actually can start to be responsible yourself. You can store and own them yourself, which is not only good from a security standpoint because now you're not putting your responsibility or accountability on other enterprises, but actually you can start to monetize it too. So, again, I'm coming at this from we give away our data freely, and surprise, surprise, the enterprises we give it to market that data, wildly effectively. Facebook does a great job at that, and Google and the teams do a fabulous job at being able to repurpose your data. Well, look, for me, I'd like a piece of that. You know, I'd like, if you're going to use my biometrics, if you're going to use me as an authentication source, I'd like to get paid for the event. You know, every time that you touch my personal data or you share it with someone else, I think I'd like a, you know, a percentage of that. And actually, I think that, you know, this is a real use case with blockchain where we get to see real enterprise delivery. We get to secure the ecosystem. And hopefully we all get to win as consumers in this instance.
Let me just make a point on that. That's called democratization of your own personal data. That's exactly, and that if you look back at Bitcoin when it came out, what happened just almost at the same time? 2008, everything went into the toilet, right? So there is a little bit of anarchy in how this all started up, and there still is, and so should there be. One example, which is very good, I'm also a co-founder of something called Shivom, a genome project. How many in here have heard of 23andMe, where you can send over a swap and they'll tell you where you came from and how many different nationalities are in you? It's a fun thing, but it's exactly the same. When you sign the contract with them, it's exactly the same you do with Facebook. You don't own the data. They monetize it for you. I don't like that. That's building a genocide database. This is why I become a little bit anarchistic. I can't allow that. So with Shivom, we basically turned it around. You give us permission to do your genome testing, but you own the data. So let's say that I have a small tumor that maybe, I'm from Denmark originally, maybe only 40 people have. Now the chance of Novozymes in Denmark making some curable medicine for me are almost zero, because 40 people in a test bed, it ain't gonna work. Now if we then could do genome testing across the world, and I'm not saying that that's gonna be done within the next 20 years, but at least in the Western countries, we could get the governments involved, and we are. In India, we've been doing quite well, and in sub-Saharan Africa, for specific non-curable disease, that's what we call it right now. They are curable, but they're not being given the attention. When we turn that around, and then my doctor asks me, would you like to be part of a study of 200 people, we might be able to find a cure. What am I gonna say? But it's me giving the absolute consent to do that. Now, I can also say no if I don't want to know about it. So just to...
And Jasper, you said at the beginning you spent many years in the US, many years in the UK. You are now in Thailand, if I remember well. Yeah. Does it mean that this is Asia driving the distributed ledger race, or?
So definitely from an academic point of view. So with the directed acyclic graph, we have it's a pretty tight race, and it's quite interesting because Israel has really come up recently. Now it's no secret that directed acyclic graph is actually a paper from 1959. Just nobody ever figured out. It's like the underlying thing for Bitcoin has been known for 20 years, right? So it's how you apply it. And we're seeing in China, a lot in Singapore. We have a few things in other places that are India's beginning also, but that's more like probably usual that they're coming after the fact and learning to do our technologies really well, how to apply them and stuff, which is good for the community. So we see a lot of community building in Southeast Asia. And you know, to be honest with you, if you look at who's the biggest bank in the world, Alibaba, right? Or whatever the bank, the Ant Financial, yeah, Ant Financial, yeah, correct. This is where the people are. So this is also where I'm seeing the application of applying these technologies to real business cases are in Asia. Now, does that mean that we're not going to do it quicker in the Western world? No, I don't believe so, because we have probably a little bit more what should we call it, mature technology view on things. We're not as afraid. And also the problem we're having and those are some of the things that I'm addressing with UNDP is what about, we're talking about all these fancy technologies, yeah, but if I go out into rural India, even rural Thailand, where people don't have smartphones, I need a device, otherwise I can't do advanced medical telephony and stuff like that without having the equipment. That's one of the downfalls, but man, in China they're getting more smartphones every day than anywhere else in the world, so it's only going to take a few years for them to be up there where, and look at the market, I mean, India, China, the rest of, we're almost, is it 6 billion? No, 4.2 billion out of 7.6, I think. Yeah. So we're over half.
And James, back to Europe, what are your clients are asking you? What are their requirements when they contact Veridium ID?
So I think, look, we're selling authentication as a platform. So some of our clients are, tier 1 banks looking to do employee authentication, pure and simple, per the last presentation, remove passwords and tokens. So they're not thinking about the biometric storage and distribution and using the distributed ledger, etc. So they're taking the first step of using biometrics as a form of authenticity to validate the who. And they're not doing it for security reasons, they're doing it for simplification reasons, which is, a bizarre kind of thing when you think about us all pushing security as the measure. They actually want to simplify the event. So those passwords are just difficult, right? They're then asking, because of all the data regulations that reside around Europe with GDPR and PSD2, etc., okay, well, how do we use this high sensitive data in an environment that's highly regulated, multiple countries, multiple jurisdictions, how can we be smart with basically the storage? And FIDO has a great way of putting it localized, and there's centralizing ways as well, but equally, we have this preference for being able to distribute those templates for security purposes and also align to all those data policies. So lots of people are fixing it with step 1, and on the consumer front, it's about how do they authenticate the client experience and not, as I say, become a custodian of people's biometrics.
Okay, and Per, you sold us something at the beginning. You say, I will explain you how the issues we discussed previously regarding digital identities could be or are already or will be solved by another approach. Can you share a little bit? And then we will jump to the question.
I can share a little bit. We're doing proof of concept right now in Denmark. And we're also working for a Nordic bank. But basically, the problem we've been seeing is even with biometrics, if you have a centralized database, centralized repository, you have a single point of failure. I mean, no two ways. You can put all kind of security around it. The better your security, the more the ROI for the hacker goes up. So that's a good thing. That's what we're doing at Hyper as well. When you're using FIDO, you have to attack every single handset that has data that has value for you. That kind of takes the sting out of hacking. Because of the 100 people in here, I would have to get into every single handset of yours to be able to get something out of it. That just is not economical. The hacker will drop it and he'll go somewhere else. Now, one of the things, and this is kind of the convergence that I have been coming into in the last 2 years. So now we're seeing blockchain, distributed ledger together with AR or AI, artificial intelligence. We're seeing big data. I call it small data, but that's just a fight of words. And now we're also seeing a new technology coming out, which is actually not new. I'm a co-founder of a company called Teridion, which is quantum computing. Blockchain is not quantum proof. Some of the DAGs that are out say they're quantum resistant. There's a big difference in that. all the passwords in the world and PIN codes and stuff like that, when we get quantum computing at a relatively low cost, the hackers will be right up our alley. So we need to get away from some of those things. So basically what we're working on in Denmark is what we call citizen key. It's basically, I don't want to get too technical, but for every transaction that you make or any machine makes anywhere in the world, there will be a new identity for each transaction. Then I'm completely compliable with GDPR, because nothing can be traced back to me. Now, of course, we're going to have a little bit of a backdoor. If you do something illegal, and you already knew you can't do that, I need to be able to lock that up and have a judge look at it, and then determine, did you do something wrong? And if you did, you get punished. We need to have that kind of social contract built into these systems as well. We hope we'll be able to show something at least by next year.
So Jasper, how do you connect the person with the ID transaction you mentioned?
That's our secret sauce for now.
Unveiled next year.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a system that we built up from, and my partner, he's actually also old IBM. He's been working on this, and he's actually been writing the preambles to GDPR and PSD2 in the EU. EU just changed their way of paying people a couple of years ago, so he had to go find a co-sponsor to be able to finish the project. And then everything, actually it's 5 years ago, then he got a little bit tired of that, and as he says, he went and got a real job. But then all of a sudden, this props up again where the EU says, they start looking through some of the old papers and say, man, we got the answer. So if you take section 15.5 in GDPR, you have to design everything now as privacy by design. Now, how do we do that? And he actually has described that 5 years ago, how we could do that. But back then it was probably a little bit too premature, and we didn't have the other technologies that we have now. Blockchain was relatively single-handedly Bitcoin, and he's not known for liking Bitcoin, so he's never been working on that. But it's basically looking at your public or private identity and giving it back to you. We totally agree with that. And if you have repositories in where you have sensitive data, we can take the Danish Genome Bank. The doctors in Denmark want them to release all the data with your personal identification number attached. So in Denmark, when you're born, you get your navel string cut off and put together with your national ID number. If that's not a genocide database, I don't know what is, and we want to get away from that. So those are some of the things that are driving us right now. There's some other things, and this is the emergence. There's some other things that we also have to take, and we're trying to fix in that quant jump that we're doing in Denmark. We have something I call my key. It's basically to be able to get back, and I think the whole reason for GDPR was to give us our identities and our personal information back, and not let Google, Facebook, or Amazon basically just rape us for our data and sell it to other people, and so they can serve us up things we don't want. Well, maybe we do want it. Maybe Amazon wants to know what books I read. If I give consent to that, no big deal. But I don't want them to know what else I'm buying on eBay or Amazon, so they can generate this big database. The My Key will basically allow you to consume. So if you take a newspaper, we're seeing that all the newspapers are dying. I don't care where you are in the world, because they don't have revenue right now. we want to give them the revenue back. Now, I will then, as an individual, be able to say to the newspaper, well, I'm quite happy to pay for the news that I'm consuming from you, but all this ringwall thing has to go away. Or I'm willing to look at some relevant, and of course that takes a little while to build that up, advertisement to get some of it for free. But it's me that decides what I want to do. It's not the media, it's not Facebook, it's not Google. And that's now doable in Europe with GDPR. So don't be too much scared about GDPR.
James, do you want to add something, or it's?
No, I concur. I think being at the center of your own data is so important in all of this, and taking back control so that you can be a part of the decision-making process. If you're an employee at a bank or a supermarket, or if you're the customer of that supermarket, I think as you onboard, open banking's trying to fix some of that as well. GDPR is trying to fix some of that as well. Your ability to be able to be transient in this world is been missing for 25 years. Probably the same period of time biometrics have been available. So if we can make biometrics a source of authority, but still remain in control of some of that content, then I think we end up with a much more secure world, and certainly be a much more kind of fruitful consumer experience.
So we're a little bit late. Do we have a question? Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's an interesting discussion. So there will likely be emerging blockchains for particular industries. We're talking about identity here, but there could be others for supply chain management or whatever it may be. So let's assume that there will be some prevailing blockchains for identity, whether that's sovereign or civic or indie or whatever that may be. So as a consumer of this, as someone that's building an application, for example, on top of sovereign, how do I make sure that as I pick sovereign, that somebody else that's using civic and they build something on top of civic, how will I be able to interact, or how will there be cross-compatibility between blockchains going forward?
Yeah, let me answer that. I've been working with WC3 the last 4 years. We have something called a work group that is standardizing something we call interledger protocol. And it basically, it was started by Ripple, but that's actually why I joined, because I didn't want them to be the overarching influence on that. But it started basically to be able to do cryptocurrency transactions between ledgers. But it's now grown into that we also have to have data sharing facilities. So one ledger can talk to another and whatever. So it is being worked on. Is it working? Well, yeah. On the cryptocurrency, we're doing quite well with about 15 cryptocurrencies of the bigger ones, including, of course, Ripple. But you have like a Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, MIOTA, and some of those. They can now, it doesn't matter on what technology you're on, because that's also important in the ecosystem, that if I want to use IOTA somewhere for small transactions, but then I want to transfer it into a bigger transaction because I'm buying some equipment. Well, what if you don't accept MIOTA? Then I have a problem, right? So we're back to the FX problem of the world. That's where we're also working on stable coins that are actually pegged to either fiat currencies, which are central bank money, or any other kind of commodity, or it could be shares or whatever. There's platforms that are doing that now. So that convergence you'll see within the next year and a half.
Yeah, I've got a question. Big deal at the moment is about identity theft, right? People talk about identity theft a lot. And interestingly, blockchain is supposed to be distributed and hacker resistant because of its distribution. what happens in a situation where there's a challenge on proof of identity and the biometrics are not kind of necessarily assigned to there's a conflict of whose are these biometrics, and then you've got KYC in there because someone said, oh, this is a valid set of biometrics for identity person X and Y, and then you've got, because blockchain's all about decentralized consensus, so who then determines the people who are making the consensus, right? Who's in charge? And I don't know. I mean, I used to get confused, but I'd just be interested in your opinions on that.
It's a long piece of thread, right? No, absolutely. It's one of those jumpers that you start pulling on, and then eventually it comes unraveled. Look, I think the KYC AML thing, to take that point first, is an age-old problem of onboarding, any client for know your customer money laundering purposes. Banks have got this challenge, and it's some of the reason why they've not been able to effectively onboard in some of these far-flung regions. I think biometrics actually aid that, and unfortunately it's a historic aid because matching against government sources in that instance is actually an incredibly effective way. So if I'm in Senegal and there's 140% mobile penetration and 15% banked penetration, how can I use biometrics to help match against government sources to onboard sources of truth when there isn't a credit history or there isn't a residential history that you can match against? So I think there's kind of use case specifics. I think in that world, government sources are great. There's 108 global databases of faces and fingerprints, things like Aadhaar and RENIAC and CMBV and all these global DBs that are owned by the government. They're enforced by the government, so there's kind of no real going back or democratization of that. So actually, why don't we use them effectively for purposes such as KYC? I think that the more difficult question, about who's the custodian. Well, that's the trust in the blockchain, right? And that's the whole point of having such a distributed capability and multi-custodian capability to be able to have that source of truth. There isn't a single source in that instance. There isn't, the oracle to go to, and in fact, that's the strength of the chain as opposed to the weakness in that chain in that instance. So I think as we're using it more and more effectively to do, client interaction or customer sort of journeys, actually having a multitude of different parties, give a degree of validation is actually in that instance far stronger than coming to a central point of, of authority, as it were.
And now let me drop the bomb on blockchain and private data. So if you put any private data into the blockchain, you're in non-compliance of the GDPR. And what we now have to look at, and this kind of come, especially in China, they didn't believe me when I said that about 2 years ago, when we got the directive or the proposal for the directive. And a lot of people have said, well, it doesn't, I'm in China, so I don't care. No, but if you want to sell your technology in Europe, you have to be compliant. Now, there's different ways and there's different technologies now that are coming out that are actually handling that, where you have a non-public and public part of the distributed ledger. Blockchain can't do that at the moment. Or the blockchains that we're, and let me just explain that. Blockchain for me is Ethereum and Bitcoin, which is just a small part in the whole arc of distributed ledger technologies, probably out on this side if we take in a timeline. We have other things coming up now. We have BigchainDB, who can actually make part of the data that you put into a blockchain encrypted and part not. And of course, them being a German company, they want everything that even touches sensitive or private data to be encrypted all the way. Once you've done that, you're actually in compliance with GDPR. Well, assuming that you can't be hacked. So that there are still some problems with the privacy that a lot of people don't really look at when they're looking. If you look at the Silk Road, well, it only took one policeman to come into an open computer. We had the same in Thailand. I could something read it, but basically a copy of Silk Road that was selling drugs and guns and stuff like that. Canadian guy that hung himself. But they had to catch him in the act. They had to catch him with his pants down. Sorry for that. Basically with an open computer so they could come in and get the whole database. But once you're into that database, then you have a central point of failure. This is another thing with the blockchain distributed ledger. We have the exchanges. They're a central point of failure. It's not the blockchain. So when you hear about Ethereum is being stolen or this or that or ERC20 coins being stolen or hacked and stuff like that, it's either the wallet, which happens to be connected to the blockchain or distributed ledger, or it's the exchange like Mt. Gox. Was it $400 million a couple of years ago? And it's usually because of people's errors, or I call it human stupidity. Either you get spoofed, you side inject something into, and I think that's actually how they hacked Mt. Gox. They tricked somebody in to give him the master. I just had the same thing happen at a thing in Thailand that we'd done an ICO. Luckily, we were on Stellar, so we could basically call back all the tokens and burn them, and then we issue new ones because somebody internally in the company had leaked something. So when we're talking about blockchain together with privacy, we have to be extremely careful and vet what it is, the technology. What technology are we using? Do we have the pseudonymization or the private, non-private parts of the data storage into the distributed ledger? If you can say yes to any of that you can actually separate it, then I'm okay with whatever technology you're using. But if you don't, or if you're not checking that, be very careful, because automatically you'll be called up to Margrethe Vestagers' office and get a $40 million fine or whatever.
Yeah, thank you, Per. Is it answering? A last question? No, you want to leave. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Per. Thank you, James. And see you tomorrow morning.
Won't you take my hand? We can make our stand tonight. Dear, hope you realize in love there is no pride. That's right. Girl, won't you understand? I am still your man for life. Babe, don't give up on love. Let's get back to justify. I'm not here to objectify. Can't hold your hand on the back of the bus. Both the grips and the bloods make a fuss. Gonna make you understand. Ain't afraid to be your man. All I really wanna say. Like in black and bitter. Like my coffee. Like my women. Like in black and bitter. Don't want no milk, put the sugar on the side. 'Cause girl, you alright. This ain't no virtual chat in the hat. I got my pen and the paper in hand. I'm gonna write a message to you. Can text you, wanna taste you, can tweet you, so sweet you. I'm putting this down in black and white. I hope you don't mind my chocolate tonight, 'cause it's right. Like in black and bitter. Like my coffee. Like my women. Like in black and bitter. Don't want no milk, put the sugar on the side. 'Cause girl, you alright. Like in black and bitter. Come on, country boy. Like in black and bitter. Like in black and don't want no cafe ole. Don't need no glass of milk for my money. Just give me that black coffee.
Okay, after the legal things, let's jump to another important part. When I joined the smart card industry at the end of the 90s, most of the analysts were already claiming that cards was dead. We are in 2018, and card is not for sure dead. Plus, we can now have biometrics on card. I would like you to welcome Michael Gardiner, CEO of Tactilis, who will do a presentation regarding biometric fingerprint card. Welcome on stage, Michael.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, John, for inviting me to speak today. As John mentioned, several years ago, many people predicted the death of the card, and it's for sure. It has been a very clear track that the smartphone has picked up a lot of traction simply because the card has not evolved or added capabilities. So today I'm going to talk to you about biometric system on card, And biometric system on card is integrating more and more capabilities inside the same form factor as a credit card. Okay. First, I want to talk about the world is opening up everywhere, and that's a good thing. But as the world is opening up, we're becoming more vulnerable. And as globalization takes place and we start sharing our data into cloud services and we start opening up our world, we have to find ways to protect ourselves. And I'm not going to read this out loud, but I'm just going to read the last sentence. Trust is the key to a secure open world. If we're really going to have an open world, we have to have ways to have trust. So I'm going to show you a short little video, and then I'll talk to you about the main points behind it.
And building trust between one another. So Harrison, if you don't mind going first, step up here on this chair and close your eyes. All right, and then everybody fill in, and we're going to ask you to fall, and then they will catch you. So you have to trust us. So I'm going to count to 3. Just relax and fall. Okay? 1, 2, 3. No, wait, no!
Okay. I show this video because this is a simple example of how in the simplest things of daily life, we can tell somebody that we're doing something and we can say, please trust us. But the expectation and the end result isn't common. And that's what I want to talk about today, the element of trust. In this particular case, this gentleman got hurt because there was a wrong explanation, but he trusted them. So I want to talk about trust. Okay, the main topic of the discussion today is a biometric card. I would talk to you a little bit about what is the makeup of a biometric system on card. First of all, the card itself is no different than a typical smart card. You communicate to the outside world through this smart element. But what we are doing, and you mind if I walk over here? What we have to do is we have to be able to tie a biometric engine to this chip. And we have to say, this chip cannot talk until you biometrically verify. Everybody knows that the smart chip is a secure environment. So the communication between the card and the outside world is a relatively secure environment. People trust it, and people know this environment. What this system on card, biometric system on card, is trying to do is trying to say that it's going to take all of this processing to make sure that you are in fact the owner of this card before this card can talk to the outside world. Okay? So in this particular card, there's an integration of a large sensor, and I hate to say this, but size matters. And the larger the sensor, the more minutia points you can catch. Okay? So it is an absolute fact that it's statistically required to have a lot of minutia points in order to have high security. So you have number one, you have a sensor. Number two, you have to have computing capability, and you have to be able to fit into the form factor so that cards can be backwards compatible. Number three, because you're starting to put capabilities into a card, you might as well go ahead and add memory capabilities or even things like displays into a card. You already have the microprocessor there. You already are doing processing. You might as well add capabilities that are going to enhance the value of the card. Of course, you have to have power management. When you take a current card and you plug it into a reader, that card draws power that's driving one single chip. When you put a system inside a card, you have to take that same amount of power and you have to manage the power of a whole computing system. So you have to have power management. And last, you have to have a modified molding technique that allows you to put electronics inside a card. Electronics inside a card that is going to be secure, it's going to be reliable, and through the manufacturing processes, you cannot go bankrupt. Why do I say that? I say that simply because when you have a motherboard or electronics you're putting inside of a card, the math says that you have to have a very high yield in your manufacturing process because you can't spend 50 cents and throw away $20 inside. If you don't have a high yield throughout your process, you'll go bankrupt very quickly making these product lines. Okay, let me go forward. Okay, now I want to talk about a little bit about the chain of trust. We all know that we deal with servers every day. Servers communicate with devices. Devices communicate with passwords and tokens. And then you have the individual. And as you go through this process, you become a little bit less secure. We all know that communicating between devices and servers are relatively secure today. There's all sorts of firewalls. There's all sorts of revolving keys and things like that. But when you get to the token and the password, it becomes a little bit stranger because you don't always have security. If I have your password, I can be you. If I have your token, I can be you. Then you have the individual. And once again, the real strategy for system on card is you're trying to make sure that you tie the user to the token. The goal of biometric system on card is to tie you to that token. And that isn't currently done today. Now, when you reverse this, you have the user, you have the biometric card, you have a device, and now you have the server. So if you can secure the user to the biometric card, you have now completed the chain of trust from user to back-end system. Now, one additional thing you can do, if you so want to, you can add memory into your biometric system on card. You can keep track of the transactions that each person does on the card itself, and you can force that transaction to be reconciled with the database. If you do that, now you're not only securing that this is in fact the person, but you're also guaranteeing that the transactions on the card match the transactions stored in the central database. That's a security measure and a check and balance, and it gives additional security to the database itself. Now we're talking about applications for ID, because the view for biometric system on card should apply to everything that's in your wallet. And if you take a look at what's in your wallet, you have identity, you have security cards, you have fintech cards, you have healthcare cards. You have cards for many things in daily life. Anything that's in your wallet has some kind of relationship to your identity, whether it has a picture on it or you have a pin to it, whatever it is. So the biometric system on card is an expensive proposition, and you have to be able to take a look at how you can leverage all the capabilities or all the necessities in your wallet into one card. And we call this ID-centric. What's the market for this? The market for this for electronic ID is really population. And although we talk about biometrics rolling into payments, we talk about it rolling into access control, if you really look at the evolution of cards, going from a card that's printed to a card that has your picture, to a card that has a pin related to it, to a card that has a smart card chip tied to it, and so forth, electronic ID is a natural progression if you can technically overcome the challenges of it and you can justify the cost for it. So in reality, electronic ID, the total available market is world population. It's a gigantic market. Now, from the user standpoint, when you use a biometric system on card, what are the conveniences you have? From the user, you have convenience over a PIN. You can walk into a location, and faster than you can put a PIN number in, you can touch your finger on a card and you can biometrically verify. It's very, very convenient. It increases security from personal data with biometric system on card, and I won't explain this because I think most of you know this. You actually register your fingerprint at the issuance of the card. Those fingerprints are stored inside the card itself, not in any other location. Once your fingerprints are stored in that card, you lock that database, and that is permanently locked. So at no time, anywhere, does your biometrics ever leave the card. And this is a big benefit for society and the individual simply because you don't require biometric databases. Biometric databases are prevalent all around the world. The previous presentation talked about the risk of biometric databases. And those risks aren't even understood today. Because as soon as one single biometric database of any government is compromised, those citizens are compromised for life. And nobody knows what that liability is. So what biometric system on card can offer is a guarantee that this is in fact the person that's using the card, and it allows the protection of any biometric data that isn't required for a central database. Also, this protects you from unauthorized transactions. If you lose this card, nobody can use it. And the goal of biometric system on card is to create biometrics, and through the size of the sensor, you can create biometrics that takes away your ability to deny you did a transaction. It's not for convenience. It's set so that you can set the levels of security at a level that guarantees you are in fact the person processing that transaction. And as it says at the bottom there, in the back I'm sure you can't see this, it says from a user standpoint, you can say this is me and I can guarantee it. But from the issuer standpoint, this was you and you cannot deny it. So there's positive and negative, you can say, from the user and the issuer on the cards. Okay. Now, I think this is a simple question, and you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't you want to secure your digital life with the power of one touch, 1 second? Because that's how long it takes to use this card. You can walk up to any location. You can biometrically verify, and the transaction can take place in 1 second. Why wouldn't you want to do that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for your presentation. Do you have a question? I think you already asked a question, no?
Yes. Very nice presentation. Thank you very much.
Very simple.
So I have a couple of questions. In the latter part of your presentation, you were making a distinction of repudiation and non-repudiation. So I'm trying to understand where that repudiation itself would be of importance. That's the second part. But the main part I'm concerned about is that, yes, we understand the technology and how innovative it may be. But from a practical standpoint, I'm also trying to think of some other things as well. Like, for example, the composition of the card. How many layers would you have to be able to securely retain the motherboard and all the components that are on it, as well as making sure that the card itself, during usage, wear and tear and so on, does not disintegrate or become less reliable as it was when it was first personalized. Those are my questions.
Okay. With regards to the reliability, there are all sorts of people working around the world on processes so that you can build this kind of a product line, and you can integrate reliability. Current processes of lamination are currently being challenged because they're trying to create, use different layers of plastic and laminated through either heat or non-heat to make the board. Then to make the card, and then there are people that are working off with liquid processes. You know, the first attack of any product is always physical. And the goal you have to have, and we have as a company, is at that first attack, if anybody gets into the card, they completely destroy everything. You have to have that as a goal. You have to make sure that it is the best possible jailhouse before they even get into the secure elements and before they get into the secure processors. So, you know, it has to be there and has to be reliable. There are, with regards to what would you call bend and twist maybe from a reliability standpoint, there are new sensors coming out today, and polymer is going to be the future for biometric sensors. It has a big future and it's proven technology. It's not currently spread throughout the world at the moment, but there's a lot of people working on the roadmap to put polymer sensors into the market. The rest of the electronics can manage, you can manage. There's technologies to manage the die, there's technologies to manage the flexibility of the flex circuit and things like that inside. So I hope that gives you some answer.
Another question, Michael?
Thank you. Can you just tell us how you manage the enrollment, please?
The enrollment is, well, there's a few different ways you can enroll. But the enrollment is the most critical part of a biometric system on card from an issuance standpoint. You must guarantee that that person is in fact the person before you allow them to enroll into the card. We have a few different ways that we do it. You can go to a location, you can receive a card, you can go through a process to place your finger on the sensor, and it will do you can automatically enroll. There's a simple tutorial on a laptop that gives you some idea of how you're orientating your fingers. Because people that aren't currently using biometrics, they have a tendency to place their finger maybe with the point down, and that's not where you're going to capture the best part of your fingerprint. So you have to do a little bit of a tutorial to teach them how to do it. Behavioral sciences says that once you place your finger in a specific location X amount of times, and I don't recall what that is, you'll automatically go to that same position continuously at a second point in time. So using a large sensor helps that, because when you have small sensors, as we have on phones, we have to touch them multiple times. This is a creation of your biometrics. In the case of large sensors, you touch one time and you're capturing the majority of your fingerprint, so you have a higher level of security, and you can allow for one touch. And I'd be happy to demonstrate how this worked for you afterwards. It's very simple.
One question.
Thank you very much. A very good presentation over here. Do you also have information on the accuracy of such a system in terms of false match rate and false non-match rate compared to, for example, a 4 or 6 digit PIN, if you like?
Actually, from the statistics or data, we actually incorporate sensors that are in the market, and we work with certified algorithm providers. So in our particular case, we use a company called Next Sensors, and we use 2 different algorithms that are highly qualified. The statistical data for reliability and false rejection and false acceptance rates is extremely, extremely low, simply because you have a very limited database. Your database is the number of fingers that you put inside the card. And I don't think that anybody in the world has enough data to say within a closed environment that you're getting a very, very specific number, because it's never been done before. However, the reliability data is published by all the sensor companies around the world.
Michael, I have at least 2 questions here. 1 and 2.
Next one.
Sorry, I can't see.
Yeah, I'm here.
Here? Here? Maybe I step down, I can't.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, I can't see you.
Okay, yeah, I'm at the last block.
Okay.
Okay, maybe I move forward, I'm sorry.
Very good.
Yeah, okay, thank you for your presentation, and I would like to understand more the reason why should we use the card as a medium between the devices and the user, while all the credentials that you mentioned with the card that are, as I understood, payment-enabled chip with dedicated space of biometric storage, and the reader and match-on possibility, right? All of those credentials and variables can be implemented on the device itself, be it a tablet, PC, or the mobile phone, right? So why the card should be the medium between user and the gadget, and why not eliminate intermediaries and tokens like cards, for instance? And of course, you might have a good argument to defend your case, but if you do so, I would like to know how much cards are already issued like that, if they are issued, and what is the user base of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
A few things. First, if you're going to talk about a private environment, I think that you can certainly achieve what you refer to as some kind of a biometric or at the point of transaction. You can certainly integrate that, and people do. They have different kinds of passwords and tokens that they use to authenticate something at a specific location. But when you're talking about an ID program, as an example, a national ID program, as an example, you can't have that at every location because you would have to have a database access at each of these locations. So you have to have mobility. And for a national ID, as an example, you have to be able to go any location and be able to verify your ID. When it's related to a specific payment, obviously you can do it at a local location. For your question with regards to the user base for this kind of a product line, this is a brand new product. We are shipping products into the markets, but I'll give you some idea of the different kinds of users. Airports, as an example, they want to secure their ecosystems. So airports are interested in using this as a ID card for people working in airports, and they're walking around with badges. And they want to be able to guarantee you are in fact this person, from the air traffic controller to the baggage handler to people working in the concessions or at security. That's one kind of user case. Migrant workers around the world working in things that are related to United Nations. These kinds of products are going to be used for cross-border as an alternative to a national ID, because if you're a foreign worker working in another country, you're not a citizen of that country, and they want to have an ID system that's highly secure that guarantees you are in fact that person. These are the kinds of usages that we see coming down the pipe, along with numerous kinds of commercial applications. Okay?
Thank you very much, Michael. So one last, and then, yeah, no, there, Michael, on your right side.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your wonderful presentation and your insights into the technology. The question I have is with reference to centralized issuance of these cards. How would the enrollment process happen for the biometrics for the card?
I think it's quite similar to how passports are issued in many countries. Many countries, you go to a specific location. It's an authorized location. They go through a process to verify you are in fact that person, usually maybe 1 or 2 IDs. Then they would issue the card to you. If it's at that kind of a level. With a private corporation, you still would want to verify who you're issuing the card to, so you probably would do the similar kind of circumstance. This product line, we can set up the architecture. We can mail you this card. We can independently send something to you in the mail that is some kind of a verification or token. We can walk you through a process to enroll your fingerprint instantly as soon as you plug the card in. So when the card has power, it's already set up in a self-enrollment mode. So you can go through the process, enroll your fingers, and as soon as the fingers are enrolled at a preset level of fingers, it automatically locks the card. So you can do that kind of remote sending where people are in remote locations, but you have to have trust.
Yeah.
Once again, you have to have trust that they're going to be the person receiving that card. But technically, this is highly possible. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we have a computer inside of a card. This is up to your imagination, what you can do and how you can architect it and how you can structure it. It's no longer just a chip that has very specific rules and regulations of how to use it. It's a complete computer system, so you can do all sorts of possibilities, and you can customize it.
Thank you.
So Michael, the last question.
Congratulations for your presentation, very interesting. My question is chip cards. For example, financial technical chip cards, the communication with the outer world underlies specific standards, regulations, for example, EMV.
Yes.
Cryptograms are exchanged the one or the other way with devices like POS, etc., etc., etc. My question is now, you think that these standards will apply also to the interfacing between the biometric environment of the card, for example, the engine and the chip card, or will it be in the chip, or will it be just an access control to the gateway of the card, to the outer world, in switch off, switch on?
No, you have to, for sure there's going to be implementations related to EMV kinds of product lines. And you could suggest it's a go, no-go, but it's a higher level of security than what we currently have for those product lines. But there's a very vast interest from the likes of, from all of the credit card companies globally, and banks as well, for the integration of biometrics. They believe that biometrics is going to bring them a higher level of security from the bank standpoint, and this is for user satisfaction as well. The amount of ID theft and fraud, we all know, to the degree that it's rampant in society, is never reported. If anything's reported, it's always usually underreported. So these people really understand the pain from the bank standpoint or the financial institution standpoint, and the users. How many of you have, just one second, John, I know I gotta go. How many of you have had ID theft or fraud? It's painful. It's extremely painful. And the only thing that this kind of system can do is guarantee that you are in fact the one doing the transaction, but you cannot deny it. So I hope that answers your question. Okay?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And we've been in dialogue with them for some time. Okay? Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael.